Chapter 163. Wu Lai was agitated. Supreme Wind smiled. Sir Wu, I don't think that I'm here to bribe you, do you? Wu Lai blushed. How could I? The 9 sirs are benevolent. How can this be considered a bribe? Even if it is a bribe, I will accept it shamelessly. Huh, Supreme Wind chuckled. Without another word, he took out a few pills and fed them to his mistress and young Master Wu before cultivating to clear their meridians. The results of the examination made him heave a sigh of relief. The child's blindness was only due to the poison, the bloodline in his eyeballs was not damaged. With the endless divine art and Emmy's help, it was not a big deal. Of course, this kind of poison was impossible for ordinary profound qi cultivators to deal with. The only thing he could do was the endless divine art. It was only after he had treated His Majesty's poison that he realized the miraculous effect of his cultivation method. I'm in so much pain when I add this explanation. So many people can't understand it. Luckily, there are enough words. Consider it a complimentary explanation. From then on, I will come once every night. Your son's eyes will be able to see again after about 10 days. About half a month later, his eyes will be back to normal and the poison in his body will be completely cleared. As for your wife, I can only help her regain her sanity and her health. However, this broken leg, there's really nothing I can do now. Wu Lai was on the verge of tears. It was the first time in so many years that Wu Lai, who had always been a righteous man, was so emotional. Wu Lai looked at the child blinking shyly and saw his mistress sleeping peacefully for the first time in so many years. Suddenly, tears fell like rain. When he came back to his senses, Supreme Wind had already disappeared without a trace. There was a note on the table, the handwriting was messy. Loyal warrior, loyal minister, heaven protects, the people have eyes, for the country and the people, one's bones will never be destroyed. Take care, sir, Yutong may last for 1,000 years. Recalling the scene last night, he weighed the silver taels tossed over by the old marshal. He knew that he would not accept it, that was why he had said that he would lend it to him and would return it in the future. My, Wu Lai's, face is valued by so many people. You're carefully protecting me for fear of hurting my pitiful self-esteem. Wu Lai took a deep breath, his eyes filled with steel-like determination. With the silver in his arms, he strode back to his house. With such a large number of loyal officials and warriors, there was no need to worry that Yutong could not prosper. He should do his part to achieve this feat. When Yun Yang went out again, he suddenly realized that the entire Tiantang city seemed to be much cleaner. It was already the 9th of October. There were still 11 days before Tai Zheng's wedding. At present, there were already 2 groups of people from other countries stationed outside the city. Tai Zheng's wedding was a toast to all the militants in the world. This was an important matter for all the soldiers in the world. Of course, this could easily become the fuse that would ignite the entire Tiantang city. Yun Yang decided that it was better to settle the matter of Tai Zheng's marriage before anything else. After all, this cup of wine belonged to all the soldiers in the world, whether they were alive or dead. They were qualified to drink this cup of wine. No matter what, Yun Yang would never allow such an event to be ruined. Stepping on the sparse yellow leaves on the ground, he walked slowly to the meeting place. Young Master Yun, you're here. Young Master Ma stood up eagerly, his face beaming. I only ask you, how much of the wine that was ordered earlier has been settled? Yun Yang asked faintly. Young Master Ma coughed and said, since young Master Yun mentioned it 2 months ago, this young brother did not dare to slack. I've worked through the night to change all the drunken immortal brew in stock to the blood of the hero label, even the jars have been changed. Besides, the 20-odd branches under the Ma family have been producing day and night. As of now, there are already 85,000 jars of this new blood of the hero in stock. How much is a jar worth of silver taels? Yunyang asked. I know. I've been working around the clock all this time. Young Master Ma smiled warmly. Young Master Yun has instructed, of course, the quality has to be the best. The market price of each jar is about 600 silver taels. Each jar weighs 20 caddies. Yunyang frowned. 600 silver taels. 1 jar. 20 caddies. Doesn't that mean that a caddy of the blood of the hero is worth 30 silver taels? I say, young Master Ma, is your family planning to eat human flesh or drink human blood? Cough, if young Master Yun wants all of this batch of wine, you only need. Young Master Ma gritted his teeth and made up his mind. 200 silver taels per jar. Young Master Yun, according to this price, we've already lost all our manpower. Any less, our family will really. After all, the quantity is too large. Yunyang snorted softly and did not speak as he held the teacup in his hand. He only calculated in his heart, 80,000 jars, 1,600,000 caddies, 3 cups of wine per caddy, 4,800,000 cups, not enough, it's far from enough. Yunyang said, I need at least 100,000 jars of the blood of the hero. Oh my God! Young Master Ma groaned, Boss, if we take out another 100,000 jars at this price, our family will be gone. Yunyang looked at young Master Ma coldly. Meeting Yunyang's gaze, young Master Ma finally lowered his head dejectedly. All right then, don't be so disheartened. Yunyang patted young Master Ma's shoulder. Your family will not suffer a loss. I promise. After this transaction is completed, as long as the wine produced by your family isn't priced too ridiculously and the quality is guaranteed, your family will definitely be famous throughout the continent. By then, it'll be hard for you not to be famous even if you want to. Young Master Ma smiled like he was crying. Thank you for your auspicious words. A total of 3,600,000 caddies of wine. Yunyang said, 10 silver taels per caddy, that's a total of 36 million silver taels. Young Master Ma looked at Yunyang with pleading eyes. We're brewing wine, not running a bank. We really don't have that much capital to put in. More than 70% of our family's cash is circulating everywhere. If Yunyang were to ask for a debt, it would be a death sentence. I have 30 million silver taels here. Yunyang took out a stack of banknotes. Young Master Ma breathed a sigh of relief. Although he still had to pay 6 million silver taels, it was already within an acceptable range. I will think of a way to get Marshal Tai Zheng's men to contact you and finalize the wedding wine. Yunyang said leisurely, when the time comes, just give them the wine and ask them for 6 million silver taels. Young Master Ma lifted his head abruptly, his eyes filled with shock. Yunyang turned and said faintly, Are you surprised? That day is a grand occasion for the world's militants. It's also a day that the warriors who died on the battlefield look forward to even in the afterlife. Young Master Ma, I hope that you will do this well. The wine cannot be inferior, the quantity must be sufficient. Also, don't tell anyone about me. Yunyang turned and walked out the door, his purple robe fluttering. I'm counting on you. This is the favor that you all owed me back then. From today onwards, I will no longer use any means to threaten you all. Young Master Ma stood rooted to the spot for a long time while Yunyang was long gone. Don't you worry. Young Master Ma suddenly felt a surge of warmth in his heart. Even if our Ma family has to go bankrupt, we'll make sure this matter is perfect. When Yunyang returned to the residence of Yun, he could feel the eerie aura emanating from his home from afar. He sighed inwardly. What would come would come. It was just as well. It would be good to settle this matter once and for all before Tai Zheng's wedding. He had been walking in a hurry, but after feeling the aura, his pace slowed down. His emotions grew calmer as he got closer to his residence's door. In the backyard of the residence of Yun. A man dressed in black sat quietly in the pavilion under a flowering tree. Lao Mei was sprawled on a stone table, his status unknown. Fang Mafei looked weary, the front of his shirt drenched in blood. His face was pale, his body swaying as he leaned against a flowering tree. Although the man dressed in black was just sitting there, it was as if he had melted into the air. There was no sense of presence at all. He was like a cloud of black smoke that could vanish at any time with a gust of wind. Yun Yang walked in leisurely, as if he had not noticed the man dressed in black. He first walked to the stone table where Lao Mei was sprawled and took his pulse. Confirming that he had only been knocked out and his meridians had been blocked, he was half relieved. He then walked up to Fang Mafei and checked his pulse as well. His worries were finally put to rest. Before Yun Yang returned to the residence, the last thing he wanted to happen was to have casualties on his side, because that would push both sides to a dead end. Now that the two of them were injured but not dead, it meant that there was still room to turn the situation around. Fang Mafei, in particular, looked like he was in a bad state, but he had only suffered the punishment when he did not defend himself. His injuries were not severe, they were mostly flesh wounds. The man in black was like a cloud of black fog, but his entire face was shrouded in a layer of black fog. He seemed to be indifferent to Yun Yang's series of actions, but Yun Yang could feel that this person's aura had locked onto him since he was 100 feet away from his house. Yun Yang sat in front of the man dressed in black nonchalantly and said faintly, "First Court King Qingguang, one of the 10 kings of the concourse of the underworld?" The man in black chuckled similarly. "Young Master Yun Yang of the Marquis of Heavenly Clouds. You are indeed someone that Ling Xiaozue has taken a liking to." Yun Yang smiled. "I wonder what brings King Qingguang to my humble abode? I'm only here to see what you're capable of. What right do you have to keep someone from the concourse of the underworld here?" First Court King Qingguang chuckled darkly. The atmosphere between both parties grew tenser as if a fight was about to break out at any moment. "If it's purely to see my ability," Yun Yang said quietly, "do you think it's necessary?" "It is." First Court King Qingguang said, "You're only at the 5th peak mystical chi level now. I shall suppress you with my mystical chi 5th peak cultivation base. If you lose, Fang Mafei will die. That's the price of betrayal, and you'll have to pay a corresponding price as well. Even if you have Ling Xiaozue behind you, you'll have to pay the price as well. What if I win?" Chapter 164. You win? First Court King Qingguang chuckled in disdain. "If you win, I'll let all of you live." Yun Yang kept quiet for a bit and said faintly, "One more condition. From now on, Fang Mafei has nothing to do with the concourse of the underworld." First Court King Qingguang sneered again. "Just based on the fact that you dare to fight a battle you know you can't win, so what if I grant your wish?" Yun Yang regained his composure as he said softly, "Please." First Court King Qingguang chuckled softly, but his laughter was like the chilling wind of the 9 serenities hell that had suddenly descended upon the mortal realm. A gust of eerie fog expanded rapidly, enveloping 100 feet of land, including Yun Yang and himself within it. The sudden appearance of the fog blocked Yun Yang's vision. He could not even see his fingers when he stretched them out, his eyes were clear. Without hesitation, Yun Yang closed his eyes. His body moved with the wind and clouds. A gust of eerie wind blew from the thick fog, but Yun Yang did not move, allowing the gust to pass through his chest. However, it was not as if Yun Yang was completely motionless. He pointed a finger at the same time the gust of eerie wind passed through him. A soft hum of acknowledgement came from the other end. Then, a ferocious force came crashing down on Yun Yang. Yun Yang remained motionless. His opponent's powerful kick that could shatter mountains fell from the top of his head all the way to the ground, but there was no resistance. Yun Yang, who had been struck out with his palm when his body was already crippled. The target of the strike was the leg that had shattered his body. First Court King Qingguang snorted in surprise. Suddenly, he turned into a gust of chilly wind and spun rapidly around Yunyang. Countless gusts of chilly wind turned into sharp blades and arrows, attacking Yunyang, who was in the thick fog from all directions. Yunyang could no longer maintain his unmoving state as he moved as well. His form was like the wind and the clouds, indistinct yet real. His body shifted at will, gathering and dispersing as he pleased. He engaged in a head-on battle with First Court King Qingguang amidst the thick fog. In this battle, the more Qingguang fought, the more he felt that the person in front of him was strange. The body of the person in front of him seemed to be even more insubstantial than him. He couldn't help but feel more depressed as he fought. Sometimes, he would even be hit by this brat. Even though there was a huge difference in strength between them, and the brat couldn't hurt him at all, he would still lose face. Qingguang couldn't help but wonder if he could really win this battle. This was the first time King Qingguang's confidence that everything was under his control wavered. A cold light suddenly flashed. An eerie and furious snort was heard. An unprecedentedly majestic force suddenly burst out. Yunyang grunted as he was flung away like a kite with a broken string. The dense and gloomy fog instantly disappeared without a trace. The outcome had been decided. Yunyang, who had been sent flying, stood in the yard 70 feet away. His eyes were as cold as ice and snow. He did not wipe the blood at the corner of his mouth as he said faintly, "You've lost." First Court King Qingguang's face was abruptly covered in a ghastly fog as the air of menace intensified. "Does it matter whether you win or lose? You did use the mystical qi of the 5th peak level at the start of the battle. However, you used the mist of the 9 underworlds instead." Yunyang said without a ripple of emotion. "Besides, you started using the cultivation base of the 6th peak after 3 moves. As for the last move you used," Yunyang's gaze was filled with mockery. "At least the cultivation base of the 8th peak and above. So, you've lost this battle. Your Highness King Qingguang." Yunyang smiled faintly. "The concourse of the underworld keeps its promise indeed." The thick fog that enveloped First Court King Qingguang froze for a moment. It was obvious that he was enraged, the thick fog almost solidifying. However, for some reason, the intimidating aura suddenly disappeared. "You've indeed won this battle." The dark fog on First Court King Qingguang's face dissipated, revealing a square face. It was the image of a middle-aged man in his late 30s. Now, the gaze he used to look at Yunyang was tinged with bewilderment. Yunyang smiled and walked back slowly, not worried that the other party would harm him. He said slowly, "If there's such a day, I'll let you live as well." First Court King Qingguang smiled eerily and asked, "Aren't you afraid of me?" Yunyang smiled. "Why should I be afraid of you? Do you think you can kill me?" Hearing Yunyang's words, First Court King Qingguang thought about it carefully and sighed softly, replying in a low voice, "I can't." He shook his head in bewilderment. "My cultivation base is at least 100 times stronger than your foundation, but I really can't kill you. Your cultivation method is strange and inexplicable. It's amazing." Yunyang smiled faintly. "Actually, what I like to do the most is to make friends. The more friends, the more options. Making enemies is too much of a waste of resources. It's not a wise choice." First Court King Qingguang's gaze flickered like a ball of will-o'-the-wisp. He chuckled strangely and said, "This reputed one's stance on this is the exact opposite of yours. What this reputed one has done in this life is to make enemies." "I've never made friends." Yunyang asked, "Aren't the other 9 court lords your friends as well?" First Court King Qingguang kept quiet for a bit and said faintly, "We're not friends." He enunciated each word clearly, "We're brothers." King Qingguang was bewildered by the current situation. Ever since he had uttered those words, this fellow's face had darkened and he had not spoken for a long time. The current situation puzzled him. What was wrong with this fellow? Was he possessed or was he scared stiff? Could he be envious, jealous, or hateful? Fang Mafei, who was standing on the side, looked at Yun Yang worriedly. It had to be said that King Qingguang did not intend to cause any trouble when he came this time. Firstly, he had other important matters to attend to this time, so it was not appropriate for him to cause unnecessary trouble. Secondly, and most importantly to the concourse of the underworld, there were those who had died in battle, those who had quit due to being crippled, and those who had committed suicide because they could not complete their missions. However, Fang Mafei was the first one who had made up his mind to leave. King Qingguang was curious about this and sought out Fang Mafei to ask for the reason. Fang Mafei boasted about Yun Yang's good points and how he had saved his life, and how he would die for his bosom friend. Only the truth, the reason that could clear King Qingguang's doubts, was not mentioned at all. This piqued His Highness King Qingguang's curiosity towards Yun Yang. Coming here and seeing Yun Yang, he felt a sense of empathy towards him. There was one more thing that made King Qingguang rather indignant: he bore the title of Hell's Ghost King. However, this fellow in front of him seemed to be unkillable and indestructible. It was as if his entire body did not exist. He was even more of a ghost than he was. Therefore, King Qingguang felt a sense of empathy, as if he had met his own kind. Of course, the main reason that made King Qingguang feel this way was because he realized that he really could not kill this fellow in front of him. His cultivation base was 100 times stronger than his opponent's, yet he could not kill him. King Qingguang felt extremely embarrassed. Most importantly, because he could not be killed, King Qingguang felt that this fellow would definitely be amazing in the future. "Why aren't you saying anything?" King Qingguang asked Yun Yang. "I'm thinking of your 9 brothers." Yun Yang grinned, a smile that did not carry a hint of a smile. "I'm very envious of you." "What?" His sullen face and silence earlier was actually because he was envious? Was there any jealousy? Envious? "I've never made friends outside, not a single one," King Qingguang said as if he meant it. "However, if I must make friends outside, I'll put you first." Yun Yang smiled. "Really? You think so highly of me?" "Really?" King Qingguang was not joking at all. "Your ranking is even higher than Ling Xiaozui's." If this admiration was true, then it was truly an unparalleled admiration. Yun Yang chortled. "Since this is the result of today's battle, this matter shall be written off." Fang Mafei. King Qingguang turned to look at Fang Mafei. "From today onwards, you have nothing to do with the concourse of the underworld." "Thank you, Your Highness." Fang Mafei still looked a little dumbfounded. Was it settled just like that? So easy? Was it not a little too childish? "Goodbye, friend." King Qingguang stood up and waved at Yun Yang. "If there's a chance in the future, I'll bring you to the concourse of the underworld to play." Ha ha ha. The grey fog of the underworld returned to him as King Qingguang turned into a gust of chilly wind and soared into the sky, vanishing without a trace in the blink of an eye. That day won't be too far away. Yun Yang looked at the direction where King Qingguang had left and murmured, "Perhaps we can meet again in Tiantang City." Sighing, he turned around and took 2 steps forward. For some reason, Yun Yang, who had clearly won the battle, suddenly turned around as if he had lost control of his emotions and kicked the entire stone table into the air. With a loud bang, the stone table exploded in midair. Lifting his head to face the dusty sky, Yun Yang shouted through gritted teeth, "Do you think you're the only one with brothers? King have brothers too." This was his response to First Court King Qingguang's words, "We're not friends, we're brothers." The moment King Qingguang uttered each word solemnly, Yun Yang's heart was filled with endless envy and jealousy as he looked at the light in King Qingguang's eyes. That hysteria, until now, had finally been vented. However, even after venting his anger, he felt so powerless. Fang Mafei and Lao Mei, who had just woken up, were dumbfounded. From this short roar, they could hear the boundless heartache. Suddenly, they felt a pang of heartache. Tai Zheng had been frowning for the past few days. He realized that his budget was not enough. Chapter 165. Other than the grassland wolves and the southern border tribes who did not send anyone, the other 4 empires of the continent had sent quite a number of people. Each of the generals had made a similar request. Can you reserve 100 pots of wine for this general's wedding? This general requests that General Tai do me the honor. Our brothers who are unable to attend this banquet, whether alive or dead, would like to have a cup of this wine that belongs exclusively to militants. Can you reserve 1,000 caddies of wine for Marshal Tai's wedding? The men of our country's military, those who can't attend, are waiting for you. Thinking of these words, Tai Zheng wanted to curse. I can't even afford the wine for my own country, why would I reserve it for you? Are you thinking too much? Of course, there was plenty of wine. As long as there were silver taels, forget millions of caddies of wine, even tens of millions of caddies could be bought. The Empire of Yutong alone had more than 10 million taels of wine. How could there be a shortage of wine? As for the wine for Marshal Tai Zheng's wedding banquet, all the taverns were happy to place their orders. However, the problem was that Tai Zheng did not have that much money to pay for the wine. Tai Zheng's wedding banquet had shaken the entire continent's military. The wine used for the wedding banquet could not be too lousy. If it was slightly inferior, it could not be used to entertain the guests. After all, the guests this time were related to the Empire of Yutong. Almost all the high-ranking military generals of the empires were here. How could they explain themselves if they did not bring out good wine? If they were to use the inferior wine that could be bought with a tael of silver, would they have to drink all the generals of the opposing countries to death here? Drinking too much would really cause trouble. Even the cheapest wine that could be served at the wedding banquet would cost 10 silver taels a caddy. Even if they were to use this kind of wine that cost 10 silver taels a caddy, the entire wedding banquet would need at least 2 million caddies of it. That would be 20 million silver taels. How could Tai Zheng have so much silver taels? Even if Tai Zheng sold all his bone marrow, he would not be able to gather it. Because of this matter, General Tai had been frowning and sighing every day during this period of time. His Majesty had just started a donation drive and emptied everyone's pockets. He could not even borrow money from anyone. He did not regret making this decision back then, he was just fretting. Silver taels. Silver taels. Sometimes, Tai Zheng was so worried that he could not sleep at night, thinking, should I send 20,000 men in 10 directions to suppress the bandits? That could also be regarded as a way to make money, a way to solve the problem, Commander-in-Chief. The leader of the guard said, someone from the Ma family is here to see you? Who? Tai Zheng asked impatiently, which Ma family? It's the Ma family, the Empire of Yutong's top tavern. The leader of the Janissaries said excitedly, their young master, Ma Chenglu, is here. Call him in. Tai Zheng was puzzled. The Ma family's wine had always been high-end. The lowest quality wine among all the wines seemed to cost 7 to 8 silver taels a caddy. It was obvious that it did not match the wine he was going to use at his wedding. Why had they come to him? Young Master Ma's first sentence when he arrived was enough to make Tai Zheng overjoyed. I've long heard of Marshal Tai's grand wedding. Coincidentally, we have a batch of wine that has been stored for a long time. We're willing to sell it to Marshal at the lowest price. Please do us the honor, Marshal. How much wine? Tai Zheng's interest was piqued. 4 million caddies. Ma Chenglu said, a pot is 20 caddies, a total of 200,000 pots. So much. Tai Zheng was shocked. Then, he thought that this amount of wine would be enough to handle the wedding. However, what about the price? As he thought about it, Taizheng asked weakly, how much for a caddy? He thought to himself, since the wine produced by the Ma family of golden spears and iron horses has been stored for a long time, it must be a high-end premium wine. Even if it's sold at a low price, it should be at least 15 to 20 silver taels. If it's 20 silver taels, it's 80 million silver taels. If this fellow really says something similar, your father will beat him out. Look at me, do I look like someone who has 80 million silver taels? Are you trying to fool your father? Your father only has 20 million now, what's there to worry about? How about 6 million silver taels for this humble shop's 4 million caddies of wine? When young Master Ma Chenglu said this, his heart was filled with emotion. Yun Yang. My great young Master Yun, why are you doing this? A whole 30 million silver taels had been tossed out without batting an eyelid. You didn't even let others know. Ma Chenglu did not know that it was not only the 30 million silver taels that were used to buy the wine, even the money that was to be paid for Taizheng's wedding and the wine had come from Yun Yang. After His Majesty's incident, Tiantang City's money supply was unprecedentedly tight. It was rare for anyone to make a large transaction. Taizheng's initial plan to sell his 2 manors and years of rewards in exchange for money could not be formed. No one would buy it even if it was sold at a discount. If not, why would Yun Yang need to go through so much trouble? Can't afford, what? Just as Taizheng uttered the word subconsciously, his eyes widened. How much did you say? He could hardly believe his ears. 6 million silver taels? 4 million caddies? 5 silver taels for a caddy? So cheap? Could it be inferior wine? Taizheng looked at Ma Chenglu suspiciously. This was probably the only explanation. Otherwise, how could it be so cheap? It must be inferior wine or else it wouldn't have been stored for so long. To reassure Marshal, I've brought 100 pots of wine today. Ma Chenglu said, it's just outside, Marshal can have a taste. Pots of wine were brought in. However, Taizheng fell in love with the wine jar at first glance. The green wine jar was not the usual oval shape. Instead, it was long and had distinct edges and corners. A large piece of red cloth sealed the mouth of the pot. It was as red as blood. On the red cloth were 3 large black words. Blood of the hero. Just this pot, this piece of red cloth, and these 3 words made Taizheng's eyes redden. Even if this wine was slightly inferior, he would still want it. On the back of the pot, the same piece of red cloth was written with small words. Loyal heart and blood to protect the country, loyal soul to build the fortress. Taizheng felt like he was struck by lightning, stunned as tears flowed down his cheeks. When the wine was poured out, it was as red as blood, the aroma of the wine filling the air. Taizheng's hands were shaking as he picked up a bowl and drained it in one gulp, feeling a burning heat rush into his throat. Immediately after, a raging fire started burning in his stomach. Great wine. Truly great wine. Taizheng's words were accompanied by his tears. My brothers, will definitely be satisfied. He asked in a trembling voice, are all the wines of this standard? Yes. Ma Chenglu said loudly, if there's a pot of inferior quality, this humble house will not charge a single cent for all the wine. Taizheng sucked in a deep breath and grabbed Ma Chenglu's hand, overwhelmed with gratitude. Thank you. Which man in the military did not like wine? It was the same for Taizheng. How could he not feel that the quality of the wine was not inferior at all? It was definitely of the highest quality. 5 silver taels for a caddy, it was no different from giving it away for free. With such a price, young Master Ma's family would have to suffer a great loss. Ma Chenglu hesitated and said, Marshal need not take it to heart. The Ma family did not suffer a great loss in this transaction. We were entrusted by someone. Marshal should be thanking us, not us. He finally said it out loud. Tai Zheng was shocked. Who? Please forgive me for not being able to tell you. Ma Chenglu said, that person has reminded me time and time again not to reveal it. Marshal, please do not make things difficult for me. I wish Marshal a happy wedding. Ma Chenglu took 2 steps back and bid farewell with a salute. I also hope that the brothers in the military can drink to their heart's content. This humble one shall take his leave. Wait. Tai Zheng called out to him, I'll bring the banknotes, you can take them away. Tai Zheng took out the banknotes and insisted on paying an additional 2 million taels. Ma Chenglu refused resolutely and went home with the 6 million taels banknotes. In the afternoon of the same day, men from the military were dispatched to coordinate with the Ma family's business to send carts of fine wine into Tai Zheng's residence. 2 large warehouses that had been emptied earlier were filled in the time it took to make a cup of tea. Then, in the courtyard, a group of men from the military were sweating profusely, stacked neatly like a mountain. The entire courtyard was filled, but only a third of it was filled. A piece of land was flattened outside the courtyard, surrounding the military camp and storing the wine in the center. When everything was done, 1,000 soldiers were drenched in sweat. Open a few pots quickly. Brothers, you've worked hard. Let us drink first and relax. Tai Zheng was about to move the wine as he spoke. Then, 2 janissaries pounced on him and hugged him tightly. Marshal, no need, no need, no need. Tai Zheng turned back and looked at the soldiers whose faces were streaked with sweat. Aren't all of you tired? What's wrong with treating all of you to this general's wedding wine? Aren't you going to give this general some face? No, no, no. One of the janissaries gulped, smiling honestly. There's really no need. This isn't just Marshal's wedding wine, it's also the wedding wine of all our brothers who have been through life and death, the wedding wine of all our brothers who are alive and dead. If it was any other time and any other wine, it would be fine. But this wine, if we don't drink it on that day, we will feel guilty. We completely understand Marshal's feelings, but this time, we truly appreciate it. The leader of the Janissary said seriously, after Marshal's wedding, if there's still wine left, we can drink it. If we drink a few pots today and there are a few pots missing on that day, even if the brothers die immediately, we will be too ashamed to show our faces. How can we face our fallen brothers in the underworld? Looking at the sincere faces, Tai Zheng felt his throat suddenly choking. All right. Good brothers. Tai Zheng stumbled into the room and suddenly guffawed, howling into the sky. Brothers. Do you see this wine? Do you see it? This is my wedding wine, our wine. Your wine. His voice was completely hoarse when he uttered the last few words. Chapter 166. 1,000 men are not enough. The captain of the Janissaries looked serious. Send another 2,000 men here. From today onwards, this wine is our life. Even if all 3,000 of our brothers die in battle, not a single drop of this wine can be missing. We brothers are not the only ones here. Underground, there are millions of loyal souls of our brothers waiting. Waiting for it. The captain of the Janissaries' eyes were rimmed red. We wait for that day to raise our goblets with all our brothers alive and dead. As long as I think of that day, that moment, as long as I can experience that day, that moment, that goblet of wine, I will have no regrets in this life. On the 11th of the 10th month, Tiantang City began to impose a curfew. Water was poured on the streets and yellow soil was used to pad the roads. The number of patrols on the streets had tripled. All the shops in Tiantang City, regardless of their origins or background, received the notice. Within a month, no one was allowed to cause any trouble. Violators would be shut down without question and would not be allowed to open again within a month. Everything else would be dealt with a month later. On the 12th of the 10th month, Some of the larger shops and important buildings had begun to be cleaned. They were decorated with red ribbons and the atmosphere was joyous. On the 13th of the 10th month, 3 of the armies stationed outside the city had arrived. The military representatives of the other countries that were scheduled to come were also gradually approaching in an endless stream. On the 15th of the 10th month, the Empire of Dongxian, Marshal Han Sanhe, who was hailed as the God of War, had arrived with his army. The entire Tiantang city was in an uproar. However, it was not a joyous occasion, but a seething hatred. They wanted nothing more than to cut him into 1,000 pieces and kill him as soon as possible. Dongxian and Yutong had just finished their war not too long ago. The Empire of Yutong, the victorious party, had still paid the price of hundreds of thousands of casualties. The blood of the sacrificed warriors had yet to dry, their corpses had yet to turn cold, and their souls had yet to leave. Han Sanhe had arrived in Tiantang City with such a light entourage, how could he not stir up a commotion? Undercurrents were surging and the repercussions were unprecedented. A letter of credence of peace, those who come are guests, a grand event for the military, we shall not stop until we are drunk. Unique since time immemorial, this is the only one, it will be passed down through the ages, a good name will last forever. Do not shame the hero, do not let the soul of the hero feel guilty. The short leaflets were delivered by tens of thousands of soldiers from door to door. 3 soldiers formed teams, one knocked on the door while another stepped forward to salute, presenting the leaflets with both hands. There was another one who was carrying a thick stack of leaflets, please understand. This is the wish of countless brothers. Thank you for fulfilling it. He gave one to every family, every inn, and every shop. As long as there were people, Yutong's soldiers would send the same leaflet. Other than being an enemy, the visitor was also a militant, a warrior who was as brave as Yutong's warriors. His purpose of coming here was to celebrate Tai Zheng's wedding, who was also a militant, and he had come on behalf of countless Dongxian warriors. Even though both parties had different standpoints, they should at least show due respect and reverence at this moment. Whatever grudge there was, he could settle it on the battlefield, but he could not act recklessly now. The hidden undercurrent instantly calmed down. Some of the elderly who had not yet been delivered their leaflets had opened their doors early in the morning, prepared some food and tea, and placed them at the door. Seeing the soldier handing out leaflets walking over, he tried his best to persuade him to stay. Child, work hard and fight well. Take care. We understand all of you. Child, kill more when you go to the battlefield in the future. My second son has just died at the Fortress of Resilience a few days ago. Seeing all of you makes me feel like I've come home again. You must eat, drink, and rest for a while before you leave, you've worked hard. An old lady gripped the soldier's hand tightly, gently caressing the scar on the soldier's face. Her face was filled with pity. Child, you've suffered. Every soldier who went to distribute the leaflets came back with bloated stomachs and red-rimmed eyes. It was quiet in the city. The top of the city was quiet. Outside the city, it was quiet as well. Half of the continent's generals had gathered here, their banners fluttering in the wind. Han Sanhe walked out of his tent slowly and came to a slightly higher mound, looking at Tiantang City from afar. The chilly autumn wind blew against his face, almost causing him to lose his footing. In spite of this, Han Sanhe stood quietly, looking at the flags above Tiantang City and the Yutong soldiers who were exceptionally energetic today. He stared at them for a long time without moving. Marshal. Zhang Gu walked forward, holding a cloak in his hand. Han Sanhe waved his hand to stop him. He only stared at the cloak and murmured, Yutong's destiny has yet to decline. Zhang Gu and the other 2 men stood behind Han Sanhe, watching with widened eyes. Marshal, where did you see that from? How come we didn't see anything? Do you know? Han Sanhe said softly, there are so many countries in the continent. There are even countries that are eyeing us now, but this old man has never taken them to heart. It was only when we were fighting Yutong that this old man had to act personally, even when I knew it was a trap. Why was that? Did you not know about it beforehand and did not discuss it afterwards? The three men were stunned. Thinking about it, it seemed like it had been like this all these years. Han Sanhe would only act personally when the Empire of Yutong was at war. As for the other countries who had only sent one of the three of them or some other generals, he had never cared about it. In the past, they had thought that the marshal thought too highly of himself and did not want to act personally. Now, it seemed like there was another reason. May I ask what is the reason, Marshal? Zhang Gu asked, scratching his head in confusion. Although the ranking of the continent's famous generals is only a gimmick to attract attention, there are many things within that are worth pondering. Han Sanhe squinted against the autumn wind and said faintly, have you noticed that the Empire of Yutong occupies 17 of the top 50 famous generals in the continent? This ratio is higher than any of our countries. As for the top 10 famous generals, Yutong's ratio is even more terrifying. They occupy 3 of the spots. Han Sanhe said faintly, perhaps all of you don't know this, but the Empire of Yutong once occupied 7 of the top 10 spots of the continent's famous generals. 7. Mu Wuyun and Gao Han, who were standing aside, were shocked. Zhang Gu was shocked as he asked, is it because of the Shengguan family of generals? That's right. Out of the 7 famous generals of Yutong, 5 of them belonged to the Shengguan family of generals. The other 2 were Yutong's old marshals. They've passed away many years ago, but the glory of Yutong's military back then was truly awe-inspiring. Even when this old man thinks about it now, I'm still shocked and terrified. If it weren't for the collusion between the 3 countries' allied army and the 36 ambushes that killed all of Yutong's Shengguan family of generals, the world would have long been Yutong's territory. Han Sanhe's voice was heavy. After that battle, Yutong could no longer expand, but the number of famous generals and marshals was endless. No matter what era it was, Yutong's famous generals were always more than the other countries, and they were also much stronger. Do all of you know why this is so? Han Sanhe's voice grew heavier. Why is this so? Gao Han was rather indignant. Is Yutong's military talent so high? Are there only so many talents? Not really. Han Sanhe said faintly, Yutong's strength comes more from its geography. Since the Empire of Yutong was founded, its capital has been located in Tiantang City. The entire Empire of Yutong's territory is the center of half the continent. The Empire of Yutong's greatest strength is because it is attacked from all sides. Han Sanhe heaved a deep sigh. The Empire of Yutong's generals are at war almost every year. Any one of them is a general who is used to the battlefield, a general who has been through hundreds of battles. To be said to be a general who has been through hundreds of battles, in the eyes of Dongxian and Dayuan, Tianxi, Zhou, and the other 4 empires, other than a handful of generals, even if the others have been praised as having been through hundreds of battles, it's actually just a glorification. Other than the Empire of Yutong's generals, there's hardly any other country's general who dares to say that they've been through hundreds of battles. In fact, the number of generals who have actually fought in so many battles is probably less than 30 across the entire continent. However, the Empire of Yutong's generals have been through hundreds of battles. Hundreds of them. They're not just fighting with their lives, they're fighting with their entire lives. Do you understand the difference? The wars we've faced are mostly against the other forces, but the Empire of Yutong's soldiers have fought the east, then the south, then the west, then the north, and even the northeast, southwest, and so on. Whether they come to attack us or not, we'll still attack them. This is a never-ending cycle, and neither side has a choice. After such a cycle, how can someone who has survived hundreds of battles not be terrifying? Yet, any country in the continent can't bypass Yutong if they want to expand their territory. Han Sanhe sighed tiredly after speaking so much. So, Yutong's strength is acknowledged by the world. We have to admit it, we have to admit it. I'm old. Even if I manage to hold on, I can't fight for more than a few years. But you must remember, when you meet the Empire of Yutong's generals on the battlefield in the future, no matter who they are, famous or not, you must never let your guard down. If Yutong survives, it will be the Empire of Yutong that can unite the world in the future. Unless Yutong falls first, only then will the other countries have the chance to fight for supremacy in this chaotic world. Actually, isn't this the main reason why the four empires rarely fight each other but we've all sent troops to Yutong? Han Sanhe said softly, Yutong is the world's enemy. The world fears it. Look at the soldiers on top of the city wall now. Han Sanhe lifted his gaze. Chapter 167. On top of the city wall, Yutong's soldiers were clad in bright armor, their bodies tall and straight. Even the sabers and swords in their hands seemed to be glowing under the sunlight. They paced back and forth, disciplined and high-spirited. Do you see that? It's not a request from the general or a high-pressure imperial edict. The expressions on their faces are from the bottom of their hearts. They're using this method to demonstrate their might to us. The expression on each of their faces is the crystallization of pride and glory. Let me tell you, these soldiers who are proud to be born in such a country and to be able to protect such a country are the strongest soldiers. A country and people that can nurture such soldiers is the greatest nation and people. When Yutong's soldiers fight, the slogan they shout the most is to protect the country. It's because they're constantly being beaten. That's why they shout to protect. As for the soldiers of other countries, even the Empire of Dongxian, many of them are thinking of fighting a war as soon as possible, gaining military merit, getting promoted and getting rich. Han Sanhe's voice was tinged with bleakness. This is different. It's fundamentally different. When the slogan of protecting the country is shouted too many times, it will naturally become the spiritual belief of the nation's soldiers. Once such a belief is formed, Han Sanhe uttered word by word solemnly, it's the scariest thing in this world. It's indestructible. Yutong repels Dongxian to the east, fights Tianxi to the north, Zhou to the west, Deyuan to the south. Even when it's surrounded by enemies, it's still safe and sound. Han Sanhe chuckled bitterly. If Yutong's entire nation's strength was only enough to face any one of the four empires, I'm afraid this country would have long become a part of Yutong's territory. I've only known today that Yutong is actually so terrifying. The three generals sucked in a cold breath. I've never talked about Yutong's history and foundation before this because I'm afraid of wearing down your morale and confidence. It's a pity that this old man is old. If I don't take this opportunity to tell you all about these things today, you'll lose everything if you're not careful when you go up against Yutong's valiant generals in the future. Even if it's an ordinary Yutong cavalryman who has survived hundreds of battles, he can be a captain who commands 500 cavalrymen when he goes to our country. He'll perform exceptionally well too. And this is only a comparison between individual soldiers. My only hope now is to breach the fortress of resilience in my remaining years and incorporate the 7,000 miles of fertile land east of Yutong into Dongxuan's territory. That will be enough. Han Sanhe said solemnly, once Yutong loses that huge territory, its power will decrease by a third. By then, all the countries will be at ease, especially Dongxian. We can unify the world if we advance and live in peace if we retreat. Marshall's wish will definitely come true. Didn't we almost accomplish this last time? Mu Wuyun said. It's a pity that I won't have such an opportunity again. Han Sanhe uttered the word quietly and continued, what I'm most worried about now is the empire of Yutong's emperor, Yupeiza. If Taizheng had organized such a wedding in any other country other than the empire of Yutong, he would have been beheaded long ago. However, in Yutong, it could be held successfully. His Majesty the Emperor had even personally issued a letter of credence for peace to promote this grand event for the militants. How magnanimous! There's not even the slightest bit of suspicion between the Emperor and his subjects. What more can I ask for when I serve you like this? Han Sanhe sighed wistfully. It was not only Han Sanhe, the generals of the other countries were quietly observing Tiantang City as well. There was not the slightest hint of hostility in Tiantang City, it only stood quietly in the distance. The city gates were wide open and there were countless people entering and exiting the city. Peace and serenity filled their eyes. However, it was this peace and harmony that caused the pupils of these battle-hardened generals to contract. The passers-by who came and went looked at them, at their own military base, the hatred in their gazes, the fists that were clenched tightly, also, the silhouettes of them leaving with their heads held high without doing anything. Those were just ordinary citizens. The letter of credence for peace is a grand event for the militants. During this period of time, we won't lay a hand on you. We won't make a move until all of you leave Yutong safely. Because we can't let our warriors lose face, we can't let our loyal souls be shamed. Life and death, victory and defeat are all decided on the battlefield. This is our pride. These words were not spoken by Yutong's people, but all the generals who had come had heard them clearly. They saw it too. Half in awe and half in fear. The 16th of October. 3,000 troops began to hold a large-scale ceremony to sweep the graves. A red cloth was hung on the door of each family that had injured soldiers or soldiers who had died in the war. A line of words was written on the red cloth. Emerald blood loyal heart protects home and country, iron bones loyal soul builds impregnable fortress. Yun Yang had put aside all other matters, whether he had clues or not, to prepare for this event with all his might. He had learned to be more obedient now. There were too many experts in this world. Not to mention Ling Xiaozue, Supreme Lord Springfrost, and the rest who were abnormally powerful. Just the concourse of the underworld's King Qingguang alone was not only powerful, he could also make Yun Yang envious. Who knew if he would attract the attention of other experts if he acted rashly? It was better to be more cautious now. The autumn wind whistled. He melted into it at once, hovering high in the sky and looking down at the land. Although the number of generals from various countries who had come this time was not many, they were all elites, there were even quite a number of superb experts among them. The intimidating aura made Yun Yang extremely wary. The only thing that surprised him was that since that day, the four noble young masters had been surprisingly well behaved. They had been busy with something during this period of time. They did not look for him nor did they go to the Cirrus house. They only knew that they were still in Tiantang City. They seemed to be contacting their respective families intensively. There seemed to be quite a number of high-level experts from the four families who had come as well. However, there was no concrete movement. They seemed to be waiting for some news. This was the message sent by the Nine Heavens dictum. As for what exactly they were waiting for, it was unknown. The sound of hooves could be heard outside the city gate. A troop of men and horses was clad in bright armor, almost dazzling to the eyes. It was Tai Zheng who had come out to welcome the guests. Half of the continent's famous generals had come to attend Tai Zheng's wedding. There was no doubt that it was sensational and would definitely be recorded in history. However, Tai Zheng's wedding could not be held in the city. Firstly, the city did not have such a large venue for the reception. There would be at least tens of thousands of people from Yutong's military participating. Including the soldiers, there would be hundreds of thousands of people. In addition to the military personnel from various countries, even if there were not many of them, there would still be thousands of people from each family. Adding on the number of people, there would be hundreds of thousands of people sitting together to drink. The space needed would be huge. Secondly, and more importantly, it was worry. The military personnel from various countries had said that they were here for He Tiezheng's wedding and had gathered at this military gathering, but who knew what they were really thinking? It was hard to tell who was human and who was a ghost. The risk of letting tens of thousands of soldiers from other countries into Yutong's capital was too great. Therefore, outside the south gate, the flat land was filled with tables and tables, all of them arranged neatly, stretching as far as the eye could see, as if they could be lined up all the way to the horizon. A high platform was draped in red and many soldiers were busy working there. They had arranged it so meticulously that the position of each piece of wood was exceptionally careful. The shape and size of each piece of wood had strict requirements. They seemed to want to turn this high platform into a perfect piece of art. This was the main venue for Tiezheng's wedding. Yunyang turned into a gust of wind and returned to the city, going to the Shengguan family of generals. During this period of time, Yunyang would visit the 6 children whenever he had the time. Yunyang was genuinely surprised by the Shengguan children's determination and tenacity, and was even more impressed. Once they obtained the high-tier martial art manuals, the 6 children eagerly threw themselves into training. In spite of this, the usual physical training did not stop, continuing at the original pace. Some of them even showed signs of increasing the intensity of their training. With the nourishment of the superior cultivation method, complemented by the high-intensity physical training, the 6 children's growth was at an unimaginably fast rate. The result, or rather, the current situation, made Yunyang fall into deep thought. After returning home, he had set up a training base in his residence of Yun and began to torture himself with all his might. Yunyang's plan was to torture himself for 7 days and see how it worked. He wanted to confirm the success of such extreme training, whether it was good or bad, and how much benefit it could bring if it was good. Yunyang's torture was truly playing with his life. At the beginning of each training session, he would first execute 3 forms of Destiny's merciless saber. Without Emmy's super recovery, the 3 forms of merciless saber drained all the mystical qi in his body. Then, he would undergo extreme training like the Shengguan's 6 children, tormenting his physical strength until there was nothing left. In the end, Yunyang, who had been training intensely, was completely relying on his willpower. It was only until he could no longer hold on and was close to passing out, lying on the ground like a dead dog, drenched in sweat. Only then did he activate his mystical qi and cultivate the endless divine art to recover himself. It had only been a day, but Yunyang could clearly feel the immense benefits of such training. His mystical qi recovered. From the initial strands of condensation, it turned into a monstrous wave that surged upwards with the force of an avalanche. When he had fully recovered, Yunyang actually felt that the thickness of his inner qi had increased a notch out of nowhere. After his body had recovered from the extreme fatigue, there was a subtle feeling of his muscles and bones being strengthened. What was more obvious was his willpower and deific consciousness. There was no need to talk about his willpower, but as for his deific consciousness, amidst Emmy's delighted reaction, Yunyang realized that the space where Emmy was hiding had actually expanded a little. Was it a surprise? Was it a surprise? But the recommendation votes and monthly votes are so pitiful. Please recommend, please vote. If today's monthly votes are okay, I'll bring my laptop to the meeting tomorrow. Chapter 168. Although it was just a little bit, it was just the result of a day's training. Furthermore, judging from Emmy's surprised reaction, this was definitely a great thing that was hard to come by. Helping others is helping myself. This is probably another form of reciprocation for helping others as well as oneself. Yunyang could not help but feel emotional. It was because he had planted the seed of wanting to help this family of martyrs back then that he could comprehend this principle from them now. People often said that fated chances were hard to find, but they did not know that fated chances were often just around the corner, born and extinguished with a single thought. With the kind heart he had back then, there would only be such good results today. To be fair, the results he had obtained today were substantial, but the greater benefit was the realization, the realization that he had seen through what might very well be a misunderstanding of the world's martial artists. Due to fate and coincidence, it was accidentally broken by him. Focusing solely on physical training is as bad as falling short. If the body can't handle it, it'll cripple the person. However, focusing solely on the cultivation of mystical qi isn't necessarily a bad move. Even if there's success, the path will become narrower and more difficult. Cultivation experts often say that the physical body is a cultivator's treasured raft to transcend the world. The true meaning lies within. Only when the physical body's sturdiness is guaranteed and it can bear the growing mystical qi can it be considered to be truly complete. Thinking of this, Yun Yang could not help recalling what Ling Xiaozue had said. The human body is the treasured raft to transcend the world, but most people waste what God has bestowed upon them. When Yun Yang recalled this, he was silent for a long time, deep in thought. In the past, Yun Yang and Supreme Cloud had been unafraid of any tangible attack in the world, relying on the intangible form of his cloud manifestation and its unpredictability. He had habitually used himself as bait, using himself to lure the enemy and defeat the enemy. He did not know that such a method had fallen into a disadvantageous position. If one was truly strong, would it not be better to face the enemy head-on and kill them? If the other party was truly strong to a certain extent, what could one do even if one were to transform into a million forms? Since then, he had paid more attention to the physical training of his body. The reason he had been keeping an eye on the Shangguan family of generals these days was also because the winds in Tiantang City had been a little off these days. No one knew exactly when it had started, but it seemed like it had started from the moment there were troops from other countries stationed outside the city. Then, a strange wave of voices rose within Tiantang City, growing stronger and stronger until it was unstoppable. The streets and alleys were filled with discussions about the past of the Shangguan family of generals. Back then, the three marshals of the Shangguan family of generals fought against the outside world. They were domineering, but they did not expect the Minister of War, Zhuo Wenlong, to be held hostage by the enemy nation. He kept divulging the military's movements and passed fake imperial edicts. In the end, the three marshals were ambushed by the armies of 4 enemy nations and died tragically on Chongqing Road. This was a past that had long been sealed in the coffin. The culprit, Zhuo Wenlong, had long been executed, his entire family annihilated. Recently, however, there was a rumor that Zhuo Wenlong's descendants had escaped death and carried Zhuo Wenlong's will. The past was not as simple as it looked. The truth was that the three marshals had intended to rebel and usurp the throne, to change the dynasty. Zhuo Wenlong, as the Minister of War, had seen through their conspiracy. For the sake of the nation and its people, he could not bear to see Yutong being destroyed and the people plundered. That was why he had decided to go to the extreme and eliminate the traitors for the nation. Although he had to collude with the enemy and set up a formation to exterminate the traitors, his intention was benevolent and the result was benevolent. However, the process of the incident was complicated. The three marshals were executed before their traces of rebellion were leaked, causing the entire empire of Yutong to be kept in the dark. Zhuo Wenlong was filled with passion and served the nation and its people, but his entire family was executed and he died a wrongful death. Now, they wanted to reverse Zhuo Wenlong's verdict. The slogan was, "We all owe justice to our national hero, Zhuo Wenlong." At first, this unhealthy trend was only a rumor among the people. However, in less than a day, it quickly spread to the circle of scholars. Then, all kinds of rumors and arguments began to ferment without warning. In between, there were countless scholars who analyzed the situation of the year by quoting from the classics and finally came to a conclusion: the three marshals of the Shangguan family of generals controlled 75% of the empire's military force that year. Their contributions were undoubtedly high enough to awe the emperor. This was the absolute truth. No one could deny it. The Shangguan family of generals had a high prestige. Each of them had countless men of sacrifice under their command. To these people, their orders were the imperial edicts. The real imperial edicts were nothing to them. The scholars pointed out even more sharply that as the marshal of an army, the soldiers he led should be loyal to the empire and his majesty, but they should never, and even more so, should not be loyal to the marshal alone. From this point of view, the crimes of the three marshals could be discussed, but their intentions were already punishable by death. Many of Zhuo Wenlong's past deeds were dug up as well, how he had benefited the people, how he had been loyal and courageous, how he had admonished the emperor bluntly, how he had been outspoken, Zhuo Wenlong's letters to his friends, Zhuo Wenlong's memorials, Zhuo Wenlong's calligraphy, Zhuo Wenlong's poems. There was a line in the poem that said, "Cast away the false reputation and give up this body, so that the wicked will not rule the world." The loyalty in it could be seen by the heaven and earth. All in all, the empire of Yutong had been cursing this treacherous official for more than 100 years, but in a blink of an eye, he had become a famous official who had died a wrongful death. There was reason and evidence, there were witnesses. The uproar grew stronger and more serious by the day. Countless scholars began to walk the streets, calling for justice for the hero and to reverse Zhuo Wenlong's verdict. They wanted to bring the deceiving Shangguan family of generals down to the dust and condemn them anew. As the generals of the various countries continued to arrive and set up camp outside the city, the commotion in the city became more and more intense. Countless scholars cited classics to denounce them, leaving those who retorted speechless. Many people who did not know the truth were incited and began to target the Shangguan family of generals. Especially in the last few days, the Shangguan residents began to suffer more and more attacks. Rotten eggs, rotten vegetables, leaves, and half of bricks were thrown into the residence. Every day, they piled up like a mountain. The main door was also slashed, and all kinds of filth were thrown into the residence. The stench was overwhelming. Even then, the people's resentment did not subside. Instead, it grew stronger with each passing day. Now, the Shangguan family dared not step out of the house. Once they did, they would be attacked. While Yunyang felt angry and sad about the absurd situation, he could not help but be greatly puzzled. Who was it that was stirring up trouble? On the surface, this phenomenon had only occurred after the arrival of the generals from various countries. Their hatred towards the Shangguan family had never been concealed, as if they wanted nothing more than to annihilate them. However, Yunyang knew that things were not so simple. Investigate. Yunyang's order was given and the Nine Heavens dictum responded. Then, Yunyang snuck into the Shangguan residence under the cover of the night. On the field, the 6 children were still practicing as usual. Although each child was still gritting their teeth with a determined look on their faces, Yunyang could see the grievance that came from the depths of their hearts. Putting himself in their shoes, Yunyang could empathize with the 6 children's current state of mind. If the 9 supreme lords, whom Yutong's people worshipped like deities, were to be denounced as filthy in the future, slandering those who served the country and its people wholeheartedly as malevolent beings, how could they bear it? The Shangguan family of generals present day might be the future of another unparalleled hero. What grievance? Shangguan Lingxiu paced back and forth with her arms behind her back, her voice cold. Is it wrong to hit all of you? The truth is the truth. All of us from the Shangguan family are dead, we've all died in the battlefield. Isn't this the best proof? Each and every one of you actually dared to ask me if the rumors outside were true. Even if I kill all of you unfilial descendants, it's all you deserve. The 6 children did not utter a word, continuing their training without pause. If the Shangguan family of generals had the intention to rebel back then, Yutong would have changed its master a long time ago. Shangguan Lingxiu's voice was as cold as ice. Not only great-grandfather's generation, even grandfather's generation, my father's generation, and your father's generation, the Shangguan family of generals of that generation had the ability to do so. However, the Shangguan family of generals' ancestral teachings were to protect Yutang, to protect the country, and to be loyal. The Shangguan family of generals' loyalty is witnessed by the heavens and the earth. How can it be erased by a few slanderous slander? Justice is in the hearts of the people, right and wrong are not to be spouted nonsense. All of you, continue your training. Don't let your thoughts run wild. Shangguan Lingxiu's expression was steely. Auntie, since our family is so loyal, why isn't anyone speaking up for us now? The oldest child was already 9 years old. He asked angrily with widened eyes, could it be that everyone who knows about this case is dead? Even Zhuo Wenlong's evil is still alive, and the other officials of the same era have no descendants. Is no one willing to speak up for justice? Isn't the right and wrong being manipulated by nonsense now? Shangguan Lingxiu said loudly, isn't this something you should be worrying about? Marshal Tai's wedding is right before our eyes. The military bosses are all busy with this. Our family's trivial matter is inconsequential. When the old sirs are done with their work, they will naturally deal with it. Justice is in the hearts of the people. Don't you understand what I'm saying? The child said stubbornly, what justice is there? Aren't the ancestors of the people who are attacking our family also protected by the blood of the Shangguan family? Why do these people still believe such rumors even though someone from our family has died and our family members are already so miserable to such an extent? Are we only protecting the people who attacked us with our blood and sacrifice? Is our family's sacrifice really worth it? Slap. Shangguan Lingxiu slapped her nephew's face, her body trembling as tears welled up in her eyes. Do you know what you're talking about? The achievements of our ancestors will be passed down in history. The Shangguan family of generals was built step by step like this. What does it have to do with you whether others understand it or not? She said loudly, what does the Shangguan family of generals' family motto say? Recite it all together. Born for the battlefield, live for the war, die for the country, sacrifice for the people. The 6 children recited it aloud with tears in their eyes. Does the family motto mention the need for understanding, comfort, protection, and repayment? Shangguan Lingxiu asked sternly. No. The 6 children puffed up their chests and raised their heads. What did our ancestors say about life and death? Shangguan Lingxiu's voice grew more intense. Only die for the country. There's no need to die in battle. It's good that you know. Shangguan Lingxiu said loudly, this is the Shangguan family of generals. Do you remember it? Chapter 169. After the 6 nephews were done with their physical training, they went back to cultivating mystical qi. However, Shangguan Lingxiu, who had always been cold and unyielding, seemed to relax at once. Her shoulders slumped as she walked to the edge of the drill ground. There was a tree there, a stone table, and a few stone stools. Shangguan Lingxiu sat down softly on the stone stools, her eyes staring blankly ahead. Her shoulders that had always been straight slumped for the first time. Slowly, her face was filled with indignation as she murmured, we, the Shangguan family, have spilled our blood all over Yutang's territory. Is it really just to protect these ingrates before us? Then what is the meaning of our sacrifice? Chief Taoist died for his bosom friend? Now that the hero is dead, where is the bosom friend? Has bosom friend ever existed? The Shangguan family of generals has fought for the empire for generations, never slacking off. The blood of the Shangguan men has been spilled all over the empire's borders, all for the sake of protecting this home behind us. Now, the people who live in this home say that we're spies. Justice is in the hearts of men? How can you speak nonsense? You're just fooling yourselves. She gritted her teeth as she muttered to herself. She had to educate her nephews in a positive light because they were still young and their hearts were still as blank as a piece of paper. If their hearts were dyed with other colors now, it would be difficult to clean up in the future and taint the Shangguan family of generals' innocence. In spite of this, the rage in her heart was even more intense than her nephew's. More aggrieved. More aggrieved. Can't they just watch from the sidelines when they don't know the truth? They attack us, the orphans and widows, after being incited by someone. Where is the conscience of these people? Where is the conscience? Where is the conscience? How can you be so ruthless when faced with the orphans and widows left behind by the heroes who have sacrificed their lives for the empire? Where is your conscience? Shangguan Lingxiu gritted her teeth and slammed her fist on the stone table. Blood splattered everywhere, her fist had been broken, but she did not seem to feel it, still trembling with rage. It was a chill in her heart. A scream that came from the bottom of her heart. It was not worth it. A complaint that came from her soul. A soft sigh came from behind. Shangguan Lingxiu did not turn around as she scoffed, "Here you go again. Are you here to persuade me? Justice is in the hearts of men? How can you speak nonsense?" Her tone was not very good, but she did not have the slightest intention of hiding it. She knew who it was. She had seen too much of Yun Yang's elusiveness in the past few days and was already used to it. Behind him, Yun Yang, who was dressed in purple, stood under the shade of the tree and said faintly, "What is there to mediate in this matter? This is the way of the world. Is this how the world works?" Shangguan Lingxiu shuddered, her eyes spitting fire. Could it be that the Shangguan family of generals' generations of sacrifices are exchanged for the word treacherous? Don't tell me that the price we have to pay is to be insulted by the world? Yun Yang said faintly, "Your emotions are too agitated now. Even if you need to vent, you have to pay attention to the method." He heaved a sigh of relief and said, "Sister Lingxiu, do you know what the most common problem in this world is?" "What is it?" Shangguan Lingxiu asked. "It's forgetfulness." Yun Yang said, "Whether it's good or bad, wise or foolish, the most common problem is forgetfulness. Forgetting what has happened. Forgetting the heroes who once existed. Forgetting the favors they've received. Forgetting everything in this world. No one from the Shangguan family of generals has gone to the battlefield in recent years. Even though you women and children are doing your best, hoping that these 6 children can put on their armor as soon as possible and embark on the journey again, the world doesn't know about it. Therefore, many people have begun to forget the Shangguan family of generals' past sacrifices. The person who set this up has made use of this common problem of human forgetfulness to stir up trouble. However, their method this time is brilliant." Yun Yang said, "They started from the streets and then spread to the scholars. Then, it spread like a wildfire, but no one has ever made the officials say anything. No matter how capable we are, we can't kill when faced with the anger of the common people, no matter how angry and wronged we are. That's why we're aggrieved. We can only be aggrieved." Shangguan Lingxiu gritted her teeth and said, "Someone must be behind this. Our family has thought of this long ago, but what chills us the most is the reaction of the empire of Yutang's people. They don't distinguish right from wrong, they forget all of history. As long as someone provokes them, they'll swarm in." Shangguan Lingxiu bit her lip, her eyes rimmed with tears. Looking at a prosperous country, everyone is willing to die for this country, for these people, one after another. They leave in laughter and laughter, only to return as corpses, leaving only orphans and widows, yet they have to endure such humiliation. Why? Shangguan Lingxiu turned to look into Yun Yang's eyes. There was a burning flame in her teary gaze. "Yun Yang, tell me, why is this so?" Yun Yang was speechless. After a long while, he finally said slowly, "I only ask for peace of mind and righteousness." Heh heh, Shangguan Lingxiu chuckled coldly. She wanted to ask Yun Yang if he felt that it was ironic to say such words now. It was very classy to say it as a bystander, but what about the person involved, the person who had to bear the brunt of it all? The reason why this incident has continued to ferment is because of the scholar's incessant actions. Yunyang said slowly. Especially those scholars with ulterior motives, working hard to concoct such things. Shengguan Lingxiu smiled coldly. That's why I'm even more disappointed and heartbroken. If it was only the illiterate people who were incited and led, it would be fine. However, these scholars are well-read and knowledgeable. Don't tell me they don't know the whole story of the case back then. Can't they tell who's right and who's wrong? Why are they still doing this? And it's not just one person, it's a whole bunch of them. A lot of them. Have their consciences been eaten by dogs? Yunyang said faintly, every one of them is a dog butcher. Most of them are scholars. It's because these people are knowledgeable that they want to stir up some trouble, and they can stir up some trouble. As he spoke, Yunyang suddenly thought of something and could not help being stunned. A scholar? Watching Yunyang leave in a hurry, Shengguan Lingxiu pondered for a moment and sighed, going in to check on her nephew's cultivation progress. She wondered, what did Yunyang remember that made him leave in such a hurry? 9 Heavens dictum, investigate the person who spread the rumor immediately. Where did he go before spreading the rumor? Yunyang sent out the 9 Heavens dictum again. Yunyang had already vaguely sensed something from the feedback earlier. Sending out the order now was only to confirm it. As expected, when dawn came, the feedback basically confirmed Yunyang's guess. A certain scholar was summoned by his master to visit his home. When the other scholars came out, they all started to investigate Zhuo Wenlong's unjust case. A certain official had. The core members of the operation this time are people from the Grand Confucian sects. Those Grand Confucian sects were invited to a banquet by Elder He earlier. Yunyang's eyes stared at the 2 words Old He, not moving for a long time. Supreme Lord Springfrost. I didn't want to mess with you during this period of time. I only wanted to get through this militaristic event safely, but I didn't expect you to destroy the military's foundation from its roots. The Empire of Yutong's military's proudest family, the one that the entire continent's militaries held in awe, was the Shengguan family of generals. Generation after generation of soldiers had enlisted in the military, and the Shengguan family of generals had always been the best subject of publicity. Once there was publicity about the Shengguan family of generals, it was as if the youth of the nation had been injected with adrenaline. That was how the Empire of Yutong's unbreakable military spirit was formed. If the Shengguan family of generals were to be tarnished, or even to have the verdict overturned and their loyal souls turned into traitors, it would be equivalent to removing the backbone of Yutong's military. How cohesive could a nation and people that trampled and cursed the heroes who protected them have? How spirited could they be? Their evil intentions are punishable. They deserve to die. They deserve to die. They will not be forgiven even if they die. Yunyang gritted his teeth. The next day, His Majesty the Emperor came to old Marshal Qiu's residence in secret as usual. Yunyang came on time as well. In the study room, Yunyang finished his words calmly. There's actually such a thing among the people? His Majesty the Emperor slammed the table and stood up, anger written all over his face. Qiu Jianhan's rage was raging as he growled menacingly. As the first and second most important figures in the Empire of Yutong, how could they not know the destructive force and the severe consequences if these people were to succeed? If this were to happen, the men in the military would lose their faith and fall apart. If the military were to fall apart, where would the country be? A scholar harms the country. This is an act of national subjugation. Qiu Jianhan's hair and beard were standing on end. Your Majesty, this cannot be tolerated. Of course it cannot be tolerated. His Majesty the Emperor's expression was cold. Yunyang, do you know who's the mastermind behind this? This nephew really doesn't know who the mastermind is. Yunyang said carefully, actually, the mastermind won't show himself so easily in such a huge matter. This nephew thinks that it's already very impressive to be able to get a rough idea. His Majesty the Emperor and Qiu Jianhan instinctively felt that this child was hiding something. Yunyang knew about the mastermind behind this. However, no matter how they asked, Yunyang would not say anything. It was not that Yunyang did not want to get rid of Supreme Lord Springfrost, it was just that now was not the time. Besides, even if he were to say it out loud, His Majesty the Emperor might not do anything to that person. Supreme Lord Springfrost's public identity was He Hanqing, once His Majesty the Emperor's teacher. Even now, His Majesty the Emperor still respected this person very much. The teacher of 3 emperors, an old official entrusted to him. The leader of the literary world, a grandmaster of a generation. Even His Majesty the Emperor would not dare to do anything to such a person. The impact would be too great. A word of exclamation, the saddest mentality of mankind is to follow blindly. Even though everyone was highly educated, there were still too many incidents of slandering heroes. Moreover, this was a world where most people were illiterate. Chapter 170. Yunyang did not mention it because he wanted His Majesty to investigate it himself. That way, the shock would be much stronger than if he said it himself. Besides, there was another more important reason. Supreme Lord Springfrost had been severely injured by Ling Xiaozue and his capability had been diminished, but the 8 experts under him were still terrifyingly capable. If they were forced into a corner, the damage they could cause would be enough to destroy half of Tiantang City. This was a loss that the Empire of Yutong could not afford at the moment. Even if they did, He Hanqing would have a high chance of leaving safely. This matter, His Majesty frowned. If the imperial court were to step in directly, there would definitely be a conflict in the imperial court. Besides, it would be making a mountain out of a molehill, it would be easy for others to make a fuss about it. Qiu Jianhan's expression was murderous. Don't worry, Your Majesty. Leave this to the military. Yunyang was excited. Then, this nephew will join in the fun and do his best. Scram. Qiu Jianhan glared at him. This has nothing to do with you. Yunyang shrunk his neck. He still could not understand how this old man could burn the bridge after crossing it so skillfully. He was indeed the leader of the Empire of Yutong's 3 greatest rogues. How many times had it been? The old marshal had said that it had nothing to do with Yunyang, but Yunyang would never listen to him. The next day, he went to the board of military to hide. He planned to watch from a close distance how the old marshal was going to give his orders and resolve this troublesome matter before him. He did not expect Tai Zheng to be there as well. What are you doing here? The old marshal looked at Tai Zheng with a frown. You're getting married the day after tomorrow. Are you here to show your qualities as a soldier or are you here to cause trouble? Tai Zheng was furious. The backbone of the soldiers is almost taken away. How can I be interested in getting married if this matter is not resolved? Old Marshal, let me handle this. Qiu Jianhan thought about it and said in a low voice, this matter requires killing. You're the bridegroom, it's inauspicious to kill before marriage. Old Marshal, you're wrong. Tai Zheng said loudly, this is not only Yutong's matter. The Shengguan family of generals is also a role model for the entire continent's militants. Killing is for the world's militants, what's inauspicious about it? For a soldier to see blood before marriage, this is the proper meaning. If I were to say, this is a good thing bestowed upon me by the heavens, an extremely auspicious event. If I really did it, I, Tai Zheng, would have the energy to drink too. For the sake of my wedding the day after tomorrow, please don't fight with me today. Tai Zheng cupped his fists together and threatened, whoever fights will have no wine to drink. I mean what I say. All the generals were stunned. I have never seen such a shameless person. Did we say that we would fight with you? There was no need to resort to such an extreme method of not giving him wine to drink. What a sinister face. So what if you're a bridegroom? Helpless, the old marshal could only pass the order to Tai Zheng. This must be done according to the circumstances, do not overdo it. But it could not be too soft. Get the balance right. Tai Zheng laughed. This lowly general understands. He strode away. Yunyang turned into a gust of wind and returned to the camp first. He concealed himself in the air and knocked Tai Zheng's assistant general out with a punch before hiding him under the bed. Then, he transformed into the assistant general and walked out neatly with a wave of his aura. He saw Tai Zheng whipping his horse over. Call 1,000 men, follow me. At this moment in the city, thousands of scholars were calling in front of the School of Literature. One of them stood on a stage, waving his arms and cheering. His expression was intense and his words were extremely provocative. Many people below were shouting slogans as well. The scene was lively. This place was the cradle of the empire's civil officials, the holy land of learning. Many of the experienced scholars shook their heads and sighed. There were also those who spoke up to dissuade them, but how could they stop the burning emotions? Yutong owes Sirswa justice. Can the mighty Yutong not give an explanation to a loyal official? Are we going to be kept in the dark forever? Are our future generations to be kept in the dark as well? We have the right to let the people of the empire know the truth. We have the obligation to seek justice for Sirswa. A loyal official should not be wronged. A hero should not be humiliated. Too many high-sounding words came out of the mouths of these scholars. They were so impassioned that even the deaf could hear them. Although these people were physically weak, they were all experts when it came to stirring up the hearts of the people. According to them, the Shengguan family of generals was guilty of the most heinous crimes. Even if there were only orphans and widows left, the number of deaths was still too little. Zhuo Wenlong, the truly treacherous official, had become a saint of the ages. He was so high and mighty, distorting the truth to a terrifying extent. At this moment, the galloping of horses sounded like a thunderstorm. The crowd was in a frenzy. On the other side, the neatly arranged cavalry arrived like a tsunami, quickly surrounding the place. Quite a number of people became timid upon seeing this and quietly slipped away. The cavalry did not stop them. Only those scholars who were full of impassioned words were not allowed to leave. Hundreds of scholars were surrounded around the high platform. There were more than 10 people on the platform, and hundreds of people below the platform. The anger on their faces had yet to dissipate, but there was already faint fear and uneasiness in their eyes. Tai Zheng sat on his horse, looking at the young scholar on the stage with a menacing gaze. The scholar met his gaze with pride, showing no sign of weakness or fear. Who are you? What are you trying to do by stirring up the people and distorting history? Tai Zheng's tone was menacing, his murderous intent unconcealed. This junior does not change his name. I am Sun Wenhua. May I ask Marshal Tai, what is your intention of deploying such a large army to surround so many scholars and coming with such a murderous aura? Sun Wenhua asked in return. You have stirred up the people's hearts, slandered the loyal and good, and confused right and wrong. What is your punishment? Tai Zheng's gaze was murderous. This junior has never done what Marshal Tai has said. Sun Wenhua said proudly, as a scholar at night, I am only doing what I think is right. He faced the crowd and continued his speech, this junior does not have the strength to truss a chicken, I am only a frail scholar. However, I conduct myself in the ways of a scholar. The so-called way of a scholar is to criticize with words and pen, to write books and write theories to be passed down to future generations, to assist the emperor and pacify the people. This is what I, a scholar with lofty ideals, should do. The group of scholars responded in unison. Many of them who understood the situation sneered inwardly. Slandering the loyal and good, confusing right and wrong, could actually be said to be so righteous? The skin of this bunch of scholars was really thick. Tai Zheng clenched his fists. Just as he was about to speak, he heard the assistant general beside him speak first. His voice was so loud that it was deafening. That's right. You scholars have to do things in the manner of scholars. This is logical and understandable. However, we martial men will only do things in the manner of martial men. Since all of you think that it is right for you to remove Yutong's backbone and destroy Yutong's faith, then we think that killing all of you is right as well. Brothers, charge! Leave no one alive. With a shout, Tai Zheng's assistant general spurred his horse forward without another word. Before Tai Zheng could recover from his shock, he saw the long saber in the assistant general's hand swing and the dozen or so scholars' heads on the stage were sent flying. Not a single one was spared, including Sun Wenlong. The murderous intent in Yun Yang's heart was overwhelming. Reason? Who King reason with you? You've even done something so heartless and infuriating, how can you be reasonable? CKU. Wherever the saber passed, blood spurted into the air. However, the assistant general that Yun Yang had turned into had no intention of stopping. Instead, he sped up and charged into the crowd. His saber was like the devil's weapon, with a few swings, blood flowed like a river. The saber in your father's hand shall send all of you down. Wait for justice with your Sir Zhua. Under his lead, the cavalrymen who had come with him could no longer hold themselves back. Agitated by the blood-red situation, all of them charged forward at once, following the assistant general's footsteps and brandishing their sabers. Kill! Kill these B***stards who distort the truth and confuse right and wrong. Kill these traitors. Kill this group of people who are making irresponsible remarks. How dare you insult the family of generals? You deserve to die. Boom, 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 the cavalrymen had only charged once, but all the troublemaking scholars in front of them were already dead. No one was spared. I know who started this. Brothers, follow me. As long as the source of this disaster isn't eliminated, the rumors will never stop spreading and the family of generals will never stop being slandered. The assistant general that Yun Yang had turned into hollered again, leading a group of cavalrymen with bloodshot eyes as they ran away. Tai Zheng finally snapped out of it. CK, who's the main marshal? I was just about to give the order to attack. Why did this B***starred steal the limelight? I haven't even vented my anger yet. Besides, the old marshal had instructed us not to go overboard before we came. Now that everyone had been killed, what was there to consider? CK. Wang Ziki. Tai Zheng roared, where the CK are you going? Your father, stop right there. He urged his horse to chase after Yun Yang. However, Tai Zheng was obviously a step too late. Yun Yang's previous conversation with Shengguan Lingxiu had put himself in her shoes. Even though he had 1,000 words of comfort, his heart was already filled with murderous intent. Now that the opportunity was right before him, how could he let go of the source of trouble? Would it not be a waste of a heaven-sent opportunity if he did not bring his troops to kill to his heart's content? Yun Yang, who was disguised as Tai Zheng's assistant general, Wang Ziki, took the lead and charged towards the few great scholars that he had identified earlier. With a forceful slash of his saber, he charged in from the main entrance and crashed through the back wall before turning around and charging towards another house. With my saber in hand today, I shall slay all the evildoers. The name list in Yun Yang's hand was extremely accurate. He would not kill anyone wrongly nor would he miss anyone. When he was almost done, he turned his horse around and charged back. He bumped right into Tai Zheng who was fuming with rage. Wang Ziki. How King dare you? Don't King run. Don't run. Stop right there. How could Yunyang not run? He whipped his horse and galloped even faster. I've been rushing to write until now, my eyes are blurry from exhaustion. It's already past midnight. Alright, time to send it to bed. GT. Chapter 171. It was only after another turn that Tai Zheng caught up to Yunyang's warhorse, but he was shocked to find that there was no one on the horse's back. *T. Tai Zheng shuddered. Could this be a spy? If the people that this person killed were all innocent, then it would really be a monstrous calamity. Not only was he the scapegoat, he was also the real culprit. However, after a few rounds of careful investigation, it was finally confirmed that none of them were innocent. These people were indeed the culprits, the source of this incident. Tai Zheng was at a loss. What was going on? Tai Zheng scratched his head in bewilderment. He could not seem to figure it out no matter how he thought about it. Tai Zheng returned to the campsite in bewilderment and saw Wang Ziki standing at the entrance of the campsite, looking around in bewilderment. Marshal, where have all of you been? Why is there no one in my campsite? What are you playing dumb for? Tai Zheng hopped off his horse in a rage and grabbed someone and gave him a good beating. Only after he was done did he order, tie this bastard up. Wang Ziki's face was swollen and his mouth and nose were bleeding, but he was still calling out, what is this? What is this? This beating was extremely unjust. When Marshal Tai heard the whole story from Wang Ziki and connected the dots, he looked like he was enlightened but he was actually dumbstruck. Other than feeling frustrated, he could not say anything else. This was because there was no way to report this. How could he not recognize someone who had impersonated as his assistant general? This was the biggest joke in the world. If this had happened on the battlefield, did he know what kind of consequences such a situation would have? The entire army would have been wiped out. Even if he had killed the right person now, what if he had killed the wrong person? Even if he had killed the wrong person, he would not be able to answer for it. How could Tai Zheng be so muddle-headed? Tai Zheng could imagine the rebuke he would receive if he reported today's incident, so he could only suffer in silence and pretend that nothing had happened. However, he was puzzled. Who was the person who impersonated the assistant general? Could it be old Marshal Chiu who had killed so accurately? Your assistant general is not bad. Not bad at all. Old Marshal Chiu Jianhan was full of praise when he saw Tai Zheng handing over the order. Clean and direct, like this old man back in the day. Not bad, not bad. He should be rewarded and rewarded handsomely. Tai Zheng's face was pale. Do you still know how to be embarrassed? If you say you're going, then you're going. Why are you wasting your breath? Couldn't they just take him down directly? You're still asking them how they should be punished. Can you reason with this bunch of scholars? Since we can use our sabers, then let's cut the crap. Sabers are our forte. After praising Wang Ziki, the old marshal pointed a finger at Tai Zheng's nose and scolded, if it wasn't for that Wang Ziki's decisive action, you'd most likely have been led into a trap. Look at you. Logically speaking, I shouldn't be scolding you on the eve of your wedding, but do you have a pig's brain? A piece of trash like you actually managed to get a wife. How blind must your wife be? Tai Zheng returned to the camp with his tail between his legs. Carrying the order of commendation and promotion for Assistant General Wang Ziki, he was filled with gloom. Me? Wang Ziki pointed at his nose that was almost smashed and was surprised. Commend me? I've been promoted? Why? When did I make a contribution again? Looking at his colleagues around him who were either envious or impressed, Wang Ziki was truly bewildered. Marshal, this, Tai Zheng roared, shut your F***king mouth. You've been F***king promoted and you're still feeling aggrieved? You've taken advantage of it and you're still acting like you're not? Left and right, go. Pow, 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 Wang Ziki was knocked out, replaced, rewarded for his contribution and then beaten up. The series of events felt like he was in a dream, at a loss for what to do. On the other hand, Yun Yang, the culprit and mastermind of this incident, was overjoyed at the moment. He had slaughtered 200 people to his heart's content today. This was secondary. What moved Yun Yang even more was that Emmy was now in an unprecedentedly active state. Emmy was in an unprecedentedly lively state. It was obvious that it had obtained the chi of injustice that it needed today, and what it had obtained today was exceptionally strong. Initially, Yun Yang had thought that although these scholars had bad intentions and their actions were wrong, they were not to the extent of being deranged and truly wanting to harm the empire of Yutang. Now, it seemed that these scholars had become villains in the truest sense of the word. The air of injustice that Emmy had gathered was already irrefutable evidence. Actually, these people who created trouble all knew clearly that the Shengguan family of generals were the true heroes. Although they knew what the truth was, they still chose to do so. Their intentions were more than just biased. These people's actions had stirred up the entire military and even most of the common people's sense of injustice. That's probably why there's so much air of injustice this time. Yun Yang pondered. That's right. The more such people are, the more they deserve to die. They clearly know what the truth is, but to achieve their goals, they still muddle black and white and confuse right and wrong. If they don't deserve to die, who will? Yun Yang snorted. If I see such people again in the future, I'll kill every single one of them. I don't have so much time to talk nonsense with them. Even history had to be twisted. The more knowledgeable these fellows were, the greater the harm they would cause. Yun Yang had not been merciful this time. If there were similar encounters in the future, he would only be more ruthless and vicious. Of course, it was impossible for Lord Supreme Cloud to appear personally. He had borrowed someone else's hand and gifted them a great merit. It was the reward for borrowing, a reward that could temporarily replace his own. Deputy General Wang Ziki, who was very lucky, received a great merit in a confused manner. He was beaten up and even made a scapegoat for it. Actually, it was not exactly a scapegoat. Even if Yun Yang had not done so, he would still have had to go on a mission. On that very day, before the civil officials could organize a counterattack, denouncing the military's lawlessness and how the nation would be destroyed if they were not punished severely, His Majesty's imperial edict had already been announced to the world. I've heard that scholars use literature to disobey the law, while chivalrous men use martial arts to violate the law. Today, Yutang scholars can't tell right from wrong, distort right and wrong, disregard loyalty, speak without thinking, erase the loyal and good, and promote the treacherous. How are such actions different from treacherous officials? The Shengguan family of generals is loyal and loyal. Yutang's land and rivers have all witnessed their loyal souls. The entire family has sacrificed themselves for the nation, sacrificing their lives for the nation. Such a large family has been decimated, to the point where only widows and children remain. Their desire to serve the nation never wavers. The loyal and virtuous officials who have given their entire family for the nation are maligned as treacherous officials. Where's the justice? Where's the conscience? It's been 150 years, the bones of the loyal officials have yet to turn cold, their souls have yet to leave, but they've suffered such slander that confuses right and wrong, distorts right from wrong. How can they rest in peace in the netherworld? A group of scholars are well-read, they should know right from wrong, they should share the nation's burdens, they should be known for their loyalty. Yet, for their inexplicable selfishness, they've committed treacherous acts that incite resentment among the people, chill the souls of the loyal and good, and hurt the hearts of the martyrs. Heaven and earth cannot tolerate this. This crime cannot appease the people's anger if they are not killed, it cannot appease the souls of the loyal if they are not punished. From today onwards, all those who speak of this again shall have their entire families executed. Yutang scholars should take this as a warning. The blood of the loyal souls shall be left in the annals of history, their names shall be remembered for generations to come, the lawbreakers shall not be condemned. His Majesty's imperial edict this time was extraordinarily strict. Through the imperial edict, one could clearly see His Majesty's ashen face, his furious expression, and his soaring murderous intent. As the imperial edict was announced to the world, the storm subsided at once. As for His Majesty's order to pursue the matter, all the scholars in Tiantang City who had been involved in this incident were collectively doomed. Those who are already dead deserve to be punished, their families must be held accountable for their crimes. Those who were lucky enough to escape with their lives shall be recorded in the Iron Scroll and shall not be employed for the rest of their lives. As the saying went, 10 years as a prefect was worth 100,000 taels of silver. Many of them studied diligently, even using all sorts of channels to make a name for themselves and gain fame, all so that they could enter the imperial examinations one day and become officials in the imperial court. Once this imperial edict was issued, it was equivalent to cutting off these people's future as officials. Cries of anguish could be heard everywhere at once. His Majesty's action was swift and decisive. He had issued the imperial edict immediately after the killings. The mastermind's men had all been killed. Even if they wanted to stir up trouble, they could not do anything about it. They could only swallow their grievances and be helpless. There was no way they could retaliate or turn the situation around. 90% of their useful subordinates had been killed by these murderers, the rest had their futures ruined and were full of resentment. There was no one they could use. What was the use of stirring up trouble in the imperial court? Besides, His Majesty was in a fit of rage, his eyes were green with rage. If they were to jump out and cause trouble, they might be killed along with the rest. Therefore, the civil officials knew better than to call out His Majesty's wisdom and let the matter rest. Another edict was issued alongside the imperial edict. It was His Majesty's consolation to the Shangguan family of generals. 2 old marshals of the military had personally gone forth to send consolation gifts to the Shangguan residents with loud gongs and drums. The commotion was so great that it shook the entire city. Countless people who had been incited were remorseful, weeping bitterly as they went to the Shangguan family of generals' door to kneel and apologize. Their voices were tearful and sincere, their faces and hearts filled with remorse. The Shangguan family finally welcomed a bright sky after a few days of extreme humiliation. A large group of people knelt in front of the Shangguan family's door. I deserve to die. I've thrown rotten eggs, it's all those scholars' fault, they spouted nonsense. I deserve to die too, I actually believe them, I hate myself, I can't even read a single word, yet I followed others to cause trouble. I really deserve to die. I beg for the family of generals forgiveness, I beg for the family of generals forgiveness. This lowly one was confused. In spite of this, no one from the Shangguan family came forward to accept the apology, nor did they have the slightest intention of consoling them. Only the residence's butler came out to say, "There are only women and children in the house, it's not convenient for me to greet you personally. Please leave as soon as possible, everyone. I apologize for my lack of hospitality." That was all he said, nothing else. However, the indifference in those words and the feeling of being disheartened lingered in everyone's hearts. The crowd was at a loss, feeling that something was wrong but they could not put their finger on it. They only hesitated in front of the Shangguan family's door. There were also people who were infuriated. "We've only misunderstood you, we've apologized and said we're sorry, what more do you want?" Old Marshal Qiu and Leng Daoyin came to the entrance of Shangguan residence together. Seeing so many people gathered around the residence, they thought that something had happened. It was only when they hurried over to ask what had happened that they found out what had happened. Looking at the Shangguan family of generals' door that was smeared with filth and there was even clear feces on it, the stench still lingering. Looking at the group of people who had come to ask for forgiveness after doing something wrong, Qiu Jianhan was furious. The old marshal strode to the Shangguan family's door and leaped up to the top of the door. cursing with his finger pointed, "You bunch of bastards, you actually have the face to come here and apologize? Can you be any more shameless? Human. You should at least have a bottom line." For over 150 years, the Shengguan family of generals has sacrificed generations of men for the empire of Yutong's stability. Now, there are only widows and orphans left. You bunch of protected people who have enjoyed peace and joy, yet you've been biased and listened to those ridiculous rumors, causing trouble and besieging the family of generals. Do you even have a shred of conscience? You've chilled the heart of a family of generals. You've said all sorts of nasty things and done all sorts of embarrassing things. Now that you know the whole story, do you think it's over just by coming here to kowtow, apologize and show your remorse? Dream on, you bunch of ungrateful bastards. The entire Shengguan family of generals has been bathed in blood and killed on the battlefield for generations, dying on the battlefield. What they've protected is only a bunch of heartless bastards like you. Apologize? Repent? How dare you say that? Looking at all of you, I feel indignant for the Shengguan family of generals' brothers who have sacrificed themselves on the battlefield. Bathed in blood and killed on the battlefield, generations of people have been loyal and devoted. Yet, they've only protected a bunch of ingrates like you. Ungrateful, ungrateful, shameless. Despicable, shameless, lowly, despicable, despicable. Have you heard the cries of the loyal souls of the family of generals in the netherworld? Have you seen the wrath of the loyal souls of righteous blood? Is it not worth it? With something like this happening, how can you expect the warriors to be willing to fight with their lives on the line? Could it be that they've risked their lives on the battlefield just to protect you lot? Who do you think you are? Chapter 172. The old marshal's hair and beard were bristling, his rage unquenchable. His deafening roar was laced with intense rage, but there was also a sense of powerless sorrow hidden within. The old marshal's current state of mind was similar to Shengguan Lingxiu and Yun Yang's, perhaps even more so. He could lead an army of 1,000,000 men and defend against the enemy from 1,000 miles away, he could command his troops with ease, he could also charge into the enemy's formation and lead the army bravely without fear. However, he was filled with a sense of helplessness when faced with these fickle and easily instigated fools. To the old marshal, it was a blessing that the Shengguan family of generals' name had been washed clean today, but it was also a wake-up call that grieved for the loss of their kind. Today, it could be the Shengguan family of generals, but tomorrow, could a few words be spoken against Leng Daoyin and Qiu Jianhan? They were all soldiers, after all. Even the Shengguan family of generals, a family of meritorious and loyal souls, had almost been annihilated. What was he? In the backyard of the Shengguan residence, a family of widows stood quietly, all of them expressionless. Hearing the old marshal's thunderous roar, the eyes of the entire family were rimmed red, tears streaming down their cheeks. Their fists were clenched tight, the grief and indignation they felt could not be expressed in words. When they were being pointed at by the public, they had not shed tears of sadness, they had only felt indignation. Now that the truth had been clarified and their reputation had been restored, they could not help the tears that flowed freely. The old mistress lit a stick of incense shakily and raised it above her head, gently inserting it into the censer before the memorial tablets. Green smoke billowed. The memorial tablets were arranged neatly, watching the rising smoke in silence. Those who were alive and those who were dead, they were all silent. All the women's eyes were focused on the old mistress. There was no emotion on the old mistress' face, but her tears continued to fall. She straightened her body quietly, tears streaming down her cheeks as she stared at the memorial tablets. After a long, long time, the old mistress murmured, "I know what all of you want to say. You want to say that all of you seek peace of mind and justice. This is what all of you want to say, isn't it? I know that your entire family is made up of scum like this. Even if you die 100 times, you won't regret it. Her voice gradually trembled. You guys are happy. Let out a loud roar, charge forward, and die a heroic death. Die once and for all, and it will be extremely satisfying. But you've made us stay. You have peace of mind and righteousness. You died for your country without any regrets. But do you really not feel guilty at all for leaving us orphans and widows behind? If you die, everything will be over. You won't know anything. But we're still alive, so we deserve to suffer all of this. Old Madam's tears flowed down her cheeks as she suddenly shouted, but why should we bear all of this? She pointed her skinny hand at the door behind her and shouted, why do we have to bear all this? One of you, come out and tell me, what right do you have? The entire morning hall suddenly trembled at the sound of this question. The eyes of all the women in the family turned red and their bodies trembled. Qiu Jianhan's heavy voice came from outside the door, Sister-in-law, we're here. The old mistress said coldly, the two marshals have come personally and graced us with your presence. However, your feet do not step on this lowly ground. How can I accept such treatment? A family of orphans and widows can't bear the courtesy of two important military officials coming to visit personally. Please return. The door darkened as Qiu Jianhan and Leng Daoyin's tall frame appeared at the door and strode forward. Coming before old Madam, both of them knelt on the ground with a loud thud. We've come late. Forgive us, sister-in-law. Two marshals of the imperial court, veterans of the military, old generals who could shake the entire empire of Yutong with a single shout, knelt before old Madam obediently, their faces filled with guilt. Old Madam's breath was stuck in her throat. She did not speak for a long time. After a while, she finally sighed softly, the cane in her hand paused for a moment as she said, get up. Yes. Allow the both of us to offer incense to the family of General's forefathers, brothers, and children as a token of our appreciation. Qiu Jianhan and Leng Daoyin stood up and retrieved a pot of incense each respectfully. They lit the incense and raised it reverently, bowing meticulously as they went forward. Their expressions were unprecedentedly solemn. There was a faint glint in the eyes of the two old marshals. It was as if the Shengguan family of generals' long-awaited valiance that dominated the battlefield and was unrivaled in the world flashed before their eyes at this very moment. The hall was silent. After some time, the two old generals straightened up. Old Madam was still standing straight. She suddenly sighed and said softly, Xiao Qiu, Xiao Leng. I ask you, she was expressionless and her voice was cold, without the slightest bit of emotion. She slowly extended her hand and pointed outside. She said indifferently, could it be, that our family has been bathed in blood and killing for generations just to protect this group outside? Old Marshal Qiu and Leng Daoyin were silent at the same time. After a long while, both of them straightened their chests and said bitterly but resolutely, we, the Yutong soldiers, eat the imperial court salary and enjoy the offerings of the people. Our rations and pay are all provided by the country, what we seek is for the peace of our hearts and the presence of righteousness. Nothing else. The two old generals spoke in unison. What we seek is for the peace of our hearts and the presence of righteousness. It was these two sentences again. These two sentences were truly impassioned and could be used in any way. Old Madam was suddenly enraged. Tears gushed out of her eyes as she cursed, you seek this too, don't you? Peace of your hearts and the presence of righteousness? Good, good, good. You are so righteous, you are so impassioned. Get out. Get out. Go to peace of your hearts. Go to righteousness. Get out. Get out. Get out. As she cried and cursed, the walking stick in her hand came crashing down on the two old generals. The two old generals endured it without moving, their gazes filled with heartache and sorrow. They could empathize with the Shengguan family's plight. The boundless chill in their hearts, the chill in their bodies, poof. Old Madam threw her walking stick on the ground and suddenly knelt before the memorial tablets, bawling her eyes out. Endless heartache and sorrow poured out amidst her sorrowful cries. Countless memorial tablets remained still amidst the smoke. Qiu Jianhan and Leng Daoyin stood still as well. All the women of the Shangguan family did not move. Each of them looked sorrowful, but there was also a sense of relief. What we seek is for the peace of our hearts and the presence of righteousness. There was still a second part to this sentence. That's enough. Yun Yang, who did not know the subsequent developments on the other side, returned to his residence in high spirits, feeling refreshed. He was surprised to find out that Yun Zuyu had sent someone to deliver an invitation, saying that there was something urgent for him to attend to. Yun Yang could not help being stunned when he heard the news. Why would Yun Zuyu look for him at this time? What was her intention? Just as he was about to head out to Sirah's house to investigate, he saw a young girl dressed in green walking over quickly, accompanied by 2 burly men. It was Zhu Chen, one of the 12 golden hairpins of Sirah's house. Although she was not familiar with Yun Yang, they knew each other. Young Master Yun. Zhu Chen's pretty face was smiling. Sister Yu knows that young Master Yun is busy and will not be meeting at Sirah's house this time. She has sent this young sister to welcome you. Yun Yang smiled. That is fine. May I know where Sister Yu is now? Zhu Chen smiled and said, Sister Yu is waiting for young master at a fun place. She hopes that young master will head there quickly. A fun place? Head there quickly? Yun Yang's eyes scanned Zhu Chen's face thoughtfully and nodded. Since Sister Yu has summoned us, let us go now. He turned and waved his hand, greeting her as usual. However, he shot a look at Fang Mafei. Fang Mafei lowered his head and said, Young master, do you want this subordinate to go with you? No need, what are you going to do? Lao Mei looked after the house. Yun Yang rejected him and said, Stay at home and look after the house. The moment they departed, Yun Yang suddenly whistled. Whitey too sprinted over and jumped into Yun Yang's embrace. Yun Yang laughed and stuffed Whitey too deeper into his pocket before following Zhu Chen. Fang Mafei waited for Yun Yang to leave before he chuckled and vanished into thin air. Lao Mei, I'll go first, you go second. Don't be discovered lest you ruin young master's setup. Lao Mei snorted and muttered angrily, Now you're the one arranging for me. Don't you have any sense of first come, first served? He followed Fang Mafei with an annoyed expression. The sky was already turning dark. It was already dusk. Zhu Chen led the way in front, smiling like a blooming flower as she chatted with Yun Yang. The 2 guards followed beside her expressionlessly. Why do these 2 look so unfamiliar? I guess we haven't met before. Yun Yang said with a smile, looking at the 2 guards. Zhu Chen chuckled with her hand covering her mouth. Does young master know everyone in Sirah's house? Yun Yang laughed. Not bad, not bad. There are so many people in Sirah's house, how could I know them all? Yun Yang did not speak anymore, but each time his gaze swept past Zhu Chen, there was an additional chill in the depths of his gaze. You know everyone in Sirah's house? That's right, I know everyone in Sirah's house. Not just the guards, even the maids and cooks. I know every single one of them, every single one of them. His hands were still in his sleeves as he walked leisurely, like a rich young master who was accompanying a beauty out for a stroll. He exuded an indescribable sense of carefreeness and elegance. Zhu Chen's beautiful eyes occasionally glanced at Yun Yang's face, and she could not help but feel a tinge of pity. It was such a pity that such a gentle young master, whose looks and aura were 1 in a million, the further they walked, the more secluded they became. They were getting closer to the red light district. Looking from afar, the people on the streets had become densely packed in the evening. Finally, after turning a corner on a dirty street, both sides of the road were filled with hawkers who had set up stalls. How could there be so many people setting up stalls here at this hour? The corners of Yun Yang's lips curled into a smile as he asked, seemingly unintentionally, Zhu Chen, where are you taking me? Why would sister you come to a place like this? What's so fun about a place like this? Zhu Chen forced a smile and said, young master, don't be so anxious. We have already arrived. Arrived? Yun Yang turned to point at the street. This is it? How is this place fun? Seeing Yun Yang turn, Zhu Chen's petite body suddenly retreated swiftly as she hollered, do it. Chapter 173. There were 500 to 600 people on the street. Suddenly, all of them stood up and brandished their sabers and swords, charging towards Yun Yang from all directions. Their expressions were ferocious and murderous. Yun Yang was like a lone island besieged by a flood, suddenly surrounded by raging waves. Sabers and swords flashed. Zhu Chen retreated hastily. However, Zhu Chen had only taken 3 steps back when she realized that she had been caught. Turning back to look, she saw Yun Yang's handsome face still in front of her, asking her curiously, Zhu Chen, what's going on here? It's not fun at all, it's only dangerous. Zhu Chen's shoulders were gripped tightly by him, as if shackled by an iron hoop. She could not move at all. Her pretty face was pale as she chided, let me go. Don't talk nonsense, I'm protecting you. Yun Yang's gaze was chilling. I'm a man who has tender feelings for women. How can I be at ease letting you take the risk alone when it's so dangerous? Other than the surging murderous intent around them, teams of black-clothed men leaped up soundlessly from the surrounding rooftops. All of them had bows and arrows in their hands, the chilling arrowheads pointed in their direction. Zhu Chen's eyes were filled with extreme fear. Let me go. Let me go quickly. Yun Yang's expression was steely as he said faintly, I have tender feelings for women. You only need to tell me who asked you to do this. Give me a name and I'll let you go immediately. Otherwise, as you can see, the other party probably won't care about your life. They'll probably give the order to release the arrows right away. As expected, a cold voice rang out from the other side, release the arrows. At the same time, Zhu Chen's eyes widened, filled with disbelief and endless terror. The sky and ground were filled with black arrows, even the last bit of light of dusk was blotted out. Mixed with the color of death, the arrows filled her vision. Zhu Chen could not help but let out a shrill cry, filled with the anguish of losing her life. The other party did not care about her at all. Yun Yang placed Zhu Chen behind him with one hand while his other hand stretched out horizontally. It looked slow in the air, but it was actually extremely fast as he drew a dozen circles consecutively. An extremely profound chi was emitted from the center of his palm. As he drew, his body spun along with the mystical chi that surrounded him. Puff puff puff, more than 1,000 arrows seemed to have met with some sort of obstruction when they were about 3 feet away from Yun Yang. The arrows were all pointing downwards, falling right in front of Yun Yang. In the blink of an eye, Yun Yang's front, back, left, and right were covered in arrows. It was a terrifying sight to behold. Countless arrows were deeply embedded in the ground, like a prison of arrows. If you don't say it now, you really won't have the chance anymore. Yun Yang's expression was cold. Grabbing Zhu Chen, he moved and said faintly, Zhu Chen, this is your last chance. Zhu Chen's beautiful eyes were already filled with fear and confusion. She said in a panic, It's someone from the Grand Preceptor's residence. It's the Grand Preceptor's first aide, Cheng Menghan, who found me and asked me to, Cheng Menghan? Grand Preceptor's residence? Yun Yang's gaze flickered as he said faintly, if you can survive today, remember not to return to Cirrus House. Otherwise, I will kill you. Before Yun Yang's words echoed in the air, his right hand jerked. With a scream, Zhu Chen's frail body was flung away by Yun Yang. This throw traversed a distance of 1,000 feet. Zhu Chen's entire body seemed to be riding on the clouds as she flew out of the range of the trap. Tears streamed down Zhu Chen's cheeks as she turned her head back in midair. Her voice was weak in the wind. "I'm sorry." However, a ray of sword light flashed like a bolt of lightning from a rooftop. It flashed past. Before Zhu Chen could scream, the sword light had already sliced her in half. Fresh blood suddenly filled the air. Yun Yang's gaze was cold as he watched the two halves of her body falling in two different directions, his gaze unwavering. Kill! Countless people charged towards Yun Yang from both sides, brandishing their swords and sabers. Yun Yang sucked in a deep breath, a gentle smile hanging on the corners of his lips as he murmured, "It's been a long, long time since I've encountered something like this." "Don't attack!" Yun Yang hollered. With a flip of his right hand, a brilliant ray of saber light illuminated the dark street. A saber had appeared in Yun Yang's hand. The saber did not feel menacing at the moment of his attack. Instead, everyone who saw the saber felt like they were looking at a gentle glow. That feeling was as if he had suddenly fallen into a beautiful dream, and his eyes were filled with falling flowers and boundless brilliance. The first half of the saber seemed to be illusory and difficult to describe. The second half, which was relatively real, gave off a dreamy and exquisite feeling. It was an indescribable feeling of fondness. Merciless blade. Yun Yang's saber light flashed. The 30 to 40 people who were charging towards him saw a brilliant ray of saber light. There was only one ray. However, it was coming towards the center of their brows from afar. Watching the saber light coming closer, everyone could not help but feel the same way. Unrivaled. Unstoppable. Unstoppable. The brilliance of the saber had long attracted the target's full attention, he could not even think of dodging it. Swoosh! A thin red mark appeared on the brows of the 20-odd people in front of Yun Yang. Their bodies were still charging forward, but in the process of charging, their bodies suddenly split into two halves from the middle. Yun Yang did not pause at all when he unleashed his saber. He spun around, a faint smile still on his handsome face. The second strike had already erupted from his hand. Merciless Dao. Unlike the previous merciless blade, this strike was like a brilliant ball of light that exploded abruptly. Countless rays of saber light shot out in all directions with Yun Yang as the center. Pow, 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 a series of human heads flew into the air like balls of meat spurting out from a fountain. A divine will first form, merciless blade? After merciless Dao, more than 50 people had perished under this strike, all of them decapitated and decapitated. However, there were too many people surrounding them this time. Those who came later completely ignored their fallen comrades and charged forward to attack again. In front of him, dozens of people came before Yun Yang. Yun Yang floated, his purple robe fluttering. He did not dodge or evade, charging head-on into the crowd with his saber in hand. Yun Yang's purple robe fluttered as the saber light in his hand shot out like lightning. His expression was cold and gentle as he killed two people with one strike. A strike from the left split a person into two halves from head to toe, while a strike from the right sent a person's head flying into the sky. Taking a step forward, the saber light flashed as dozens of weapons broke in unison. Almost at the same time, a series of heads flew into the air, the sound of splintering flesh lingering in the air. Yun Yang strode forward without stopping. The saber light was continuous, like a ray of light that connected heaven and earth, from front to back and from left to right. The heads that flew into the sky fell. Yun Yang's left hand patted lightly, sending the heads flying like cannonballs. Whenever they landed on someone, the victim would vomit blood immediately. If they accidentally landed on someone's head, both heads would explode at the same time, blooming like a peach blossom. Yun Yang did not utter a word from the beginning to the end. He was calm and collected as he strode forward, but an endless murderous intent descended upon the world, ready to slaughter. Wherever he passed, there were only corpses and corpses. Killing now was easier than chopping vegetables. All the enemies who had charged at him did not even have the time to make a move. Yun Yang had finished them off with a casual swing of his saber. Yun Yang had already charged 300 feet from the beginning of the incident. However, the distance between each step was fixed. He was like a beautiful dancer who danced amidst the rain of blood and wind with precise drumbeats. He was unparalleled in his magnificence. Suddenly, Yun Yang's purple robe fluttered as he floated up like a cloud for the first time. His feet stepped over the heads of 6 people. When the 6 heads were smashed like 6 watermelons, Yun Yang landed lightly. With a flash of saber light, he beheaded the 3 people who were about to escape. Blood splattered like a rainbow, filling the eyes with splendor and blood. Poof! Yun Yang sprung up again, his foot stepping on another person's head. This time, he lowered his body slightly. It was not that Yun Yang's qigong was weak, it was intentional. The person's head was stomped into his chest by his slightly lowered body, flattening him. Yun Yang used the momentum to descend slowly, his purple robe fluttering in the night breeze. His saber light was like a swimming dragon, circling once. The last 17 assassins were decapitated one after the other, their souls sent to the underworld. There was a meat pie on the ground. As the broken sabers and swords fell from the sky, Yun Yang stretched out his left hand, fingers as slender as a lady's, and flicked them out like a blooming flower. Poof, 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 dozens of broken blades in the air changed their direction, flying out like meteors chasing after the moon. Following that, loud poof sounds could be heard. It was the assassins who had been scared out of their wits and were running in all directions. Without exception, blood spurted from the back of their hearts and they fell to the ground. Streaks of black light filled the sky. It was the arrows that had been stabbed into the ground that suddenly flew up at the same time. Swoosh, 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 the archers on top of the wall had just drawn their bows when they fell to the ground one after another. At this moment, the streets of the red light district were like a slaughterhouse drunk with blood. There were at least 400 dead people lying on the ground, leaving only silence. There were no wounded in this battle, all of them had been killed in a single strike. Total annihilation. Poof! The last archer fell from the top of the wall. He turned to escape when he saw that the situation was not in his favor, but an arrow pierced through the back of his neck when he had already leaped off the wall. It was a one-hit kill. Yun Yang's purple robe fluttered as he stood proudly. After the massacre, his robe was still spotless. He raised his saber with his right hand and pointed at 6 directions in the dark with the tip of his saber. Then, the tip of the saber went up and pointed at 2 corners of the roof. He said faintly, "Come out." The last rays of dusk shone on Yun Yang's face. He was still as indifferent as before, still wearing a calm, gentle smile. He was like a young master who had gone out to play. He was languid and tired, but there was a slight smile at the corners of his lips. It was as if he was exclaiming at the sunset, exclaiming at the beauty of this world. It was filled with an indescribable sense of melancholy and admiration. However, beneath his feet was a crimson sea of blood that was formed from the blood of over 400 corpses. Those who were hiding in the dark felt a chill rush up from the soles of their feet. Everyone felt their scalp tingle as goosebumps rose all over their bodies. Was this the popinjay that the Grand Tutor had asked us to kill? If people like this were considered popinjays. Chapter 174. One by one, they recalled what Steward Cheng had said during the mission: make sure nothing goes wrong. Send more men. Now that the generals from various countries are here, finish them off amidst the chaos. Even if it's complete, Steward Cheng is still making a mountain out of a molehill. It's just a deal with a popinjay, how can 500 men be needed? The leader guffawed as if everything was within his grasp. Everything should be done with safety first. Steward Cheng said faintly, a lion uses its full strength to catch a rabbit. Besides, this young Master Yun isn't a complete popinjay, he has a cultivation base as well. After all, he's the only son of the Marquis of Heavenly Clouds. What cultivation base can withstand the siege of 500 martial artists? Even the Marquis of Heavenly Clouds himself can withstand such a force. The few men who led the team were inwardly shocked. Someone had lured them in, set up a trap, and set up a siege. 500 men had besieged one popinjay. This was overestimating him. However, only now did they know. 500 men? To young Master Yun, it was like a joke. It was unknown how capable the Marquis of Heavenly Clouds was, but his only son, young Master Yun, was truly a living Azura. He had killed so many people in one go, yet he could still smile so gently, as if he was reminiscing. What kind of mental fortitude did he have? It was truly unbearable. They had been hiding here all this while. Only one of them had killed Zhu Chen, the rest of them had not moved at all. Initially, they had been waiting for the right moment to strike. However, as Yun Yang displayed his shocking ability and went on a killing spree, no one had even thought of attacking. Just looking at how the fifth peak expert who was leading the 500 men was cleaved into two halves by Yun Yang with his sword in a single exchange, no one had any intention of fighting back anymore. A strike of the fifth peak. In that case, how many moves could these fifth peak pinnacle cultivators like them withstand? The man who had killed Zhu Chen with a single slash was as pale as a sheet, his heart pounding. He remembered clearly that when he had killed Zhu Chen, Yun Yang had lifted his head to look at him coldly. After witnessing Yun Yang's combat power with his own eyes, he was certain of one thing: Yun Yang could definitely save Zhu Chen in time. As long as Yun Yang attacked, he would not be able to kill this woman. However, Yun Yang did not make a move. It was obvious that he had no intention of saving this woman. However, recalling Yun Yang's cold and indifferent gaze when he had looked at him, he could not help feeling more afraid the more he thought about it. Yun Yang's purple robe fluttered as he took a few slow steps in the sea of blood and said softly, "Why, aren't you all coming out yet? There are currently 11 of you, 5 on my left and 4 on my right." The one grabbing onto the roof on the right was the one who had just killed Zhu Chen. "Don't hide, I've already noticed you. And those two on the two tallest trees, do they think they're hiding perfectly?" Yun Yang lifted his head slightly, half of his face showing clear mockery. "Do you think you can still escape? Stop your wishful thinking. Come and die." Pa. It was a person hiding in the dark who was so frightened that his grip was too heavy, shattering a piece of roof tile. Yun Yang cast a faint glance in that direction but did not move. He said coldly, "If you all don't come out, then I'll go and find you all. Divided, you're weak. Separated, you're even less able to fight against me. You're destined to be defeated by me one by one, all of you." Swoosh, 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 swoosh. 11 people appeared on the roof in unison. High and low, all of them looked down with complicated gazes at the purple-clothed man who stood amidst the mountain of corpses and the sea of blood. That tall and straight figure, that handsome face that could make any man feel ashamed of himself. However, the 11 people's gazes were directed at him as if they were watching a malicious spirit that had charged out from hell, their gazes filled with fear. Cough. "Young Master Yun. I've heard so much about you." The leader chuckled dryly, his eyes filled with fear as he said, "We brothers have no choice in this matter. After all, we're eating his meals and obeying his orders. It can't be helped." Yun Yang's gaze focused on the leader. There was a sudden flicker in his eyes as his pupils shrunk, but it disappeared almost immediately. He nodded faintly and said, "I understand very well. Taking someone's money and helping them avert disaster, that's a wise saying. However, understanding is one thing. So many people have fallen under my saber today, I can only sigh helplessly. After all, people will always choose to defend themselves when they're faced with danger. Don't you think so? Yun Yang's voice was still calm, laced with a tinge of tiredness and gentleness. The man opposite him felt a chill run down his spine. A few people beside him turned to look at him, the hairs on his face and arms were already standing on end. Young Master Yun is right. You're right, huh? The man chuckled dryly. Since all of you have come out, then give me an explanation. Yun Yang smiled. When encountering something like this in the martial world, we need to leave something behind. As veterans, I'm sure all of you know this martial world rule, right? The man's expression was bitter as he asked tentatively, I wonder what young Master Yun wants us to leave behind? Yun Yang smiled gently and said, a debt of life should be repaid with one's life. Of course, I want your heads to be left behind, but I'm sure you won't do it. He paused for a moment, almost scaring the 11 men to death. Big brother, don't you know that you're going to scare people to death when you speak? However, according to the martial world's rules, it's a must to leave an arm behind for such matters. Yun Yang's eyes glinted like a blade's edge. Either an arm, an eye, or a leg. Take your pick. There's one more thing. Leave your lives behind. Remember to go back and tell the Grand Tutor. Yun Yang raised his head. Tell him that he's old and has worked hard for the country and the people for a long time. He's a good official, and it wasn't easy to earn his reputation. His son-in-law deserves it. Tell the old man to stop courting death. The leader's gaze flickered as he said bitterly, young Master Yun, this is still a little too much. Yun Yang smiled faintly but did not make a sound. At this moment, two silhouettes suddenly appeared from both sides. An extremely strong aura engulfed them, causing the 11 men to feel their breathing quicken. Under this mighty and tyrannical pressure, how could they not know that these two people that had suddenly appeared were even stronger experts that they were unable to contend against? Yun Yang chuckled. I thought that the trap we've encountered this time would be a formidable one, causing me to bring 2 extra guards. He chuckled mockingly. If I'd known this earlier, I wouldn't have made such a fuss. Although it's better to be safe than sorry, it's inevitable that I'll involve a lot of people if I'm too careful. Seeing that the disparity in strength between the two parties was even greater, the leader gritted his teeth and said dejectedly, young Master Yun is truly remarkable. We brothers will admit defeat this time. The rest of the men were ashen as well, even the last bit of hope that they might be lucky had vanished. With a flash of saber light, the leader cried out in pain as his left arm was chopped off. Blood splattered like a fountain. Young Master Yun, is this, all right? The man covered his wound with his hand, grimacing in pain as beads of sweat the size of soybeans rolled down his forehead. His rough face had already become deathly pale. Yun Yang looked at his face calmly and shifted his gaze to the next man. The man closed his eyes and rolled up his sleeves, stuffing them into his mouth. Gritting his teeth, a saber light flashed and an arm was chopped off as well. The others looked at Yun Yang with pleading gazes. Yun Yang returned their gazes gently, his gaze calm and indifferent, devoid of any mercy. You came to kill me, I don't want your lives. It's already a great mercy. You want me to be extra kind? Everyone was in despair. At the same time, they understood that in front of this demon who could kill 500 people in one breath, it was impossible to hope that he would be kind and take pity on them, and let them off with this punishment. Each of them gritted their teeth and chopped off one of their arms, their hearts filled with endless regret. Why were they so unlucky to be sent out to carry out this mission? Did the residents of Grand Tutor's people eat sh*t? This young Master Yun's skill was so terrifying, yet they had labeled him as a popinjay who only knew a little martial arts and had an insignificant mystical chi cultivation base. If such a cultivation base was only insignificant, then what were they? How many people in this world could be said to have a superior cultivation base? Since you've paid the price, go back. Yun Yang's expression was cold. You're lucky not to die today, but it doesn't mean that you'll be so lucky next time. A sharp, murderous intent gleamed in his eyes. Don't forget. Tell Grand Tutor Lu not to seek death again. With a flick of his sleeve, Yun Yang turned around and strode back, stepping on the puddles of blood on the ground. Just as he walked out of the street, a fierce-looking thug peeked his head out from a corner. He could not help crying out when he saw the street filled with corpses and blood. Seeing Yun Yang walk out from the sea of corpses and walk towards him like the god of death, the thug's heart stopped beating. He stared at Yun Yang, not knowing to avert his gaze. Yun Yang turned his head indifferently and glanced at the thug with a cold gaze before he continued to stride away. Wherever his feet passed, a bright red footprint was left behind. The thug felt that Yun Yang's glance was like the gaze of the king of hell from the depths of hell. He was shaken to the core, his eyes staring blankly as he moaned, "I didn't kill them. I just... Don't come over, don't come over." No one knew what terrifying thing had occurred to this person, but before his voice could echo in the air, his eyes bulged out of their sockets. He took 2 steps forward and suddenly fell to the ground, twitching a few times before he stopped moving. This thug had actually been scared to death by Yun Yang's nonchalant gaze. "There's a gathering tonight, don't know when I'll be back. P.S. I've tried my best. I think my updates are considered fast. What do you think?" Chapter 175. As Yun Yang slowly walked out of the street, he could vaguely hear the voices of the leaders behind him. His expression changed and his footsteps came to a halt. Behind him, the 11 men were moaning, helping each other to bandage their wounds. All of them looked pale and weary. The battle tonight was like a nightmare. "Boss." One of them looked at the leader with a defeated expression. What do you want?" "I want to quit the martial world." The man looked bitter. "Let's see how much compensation the Grand Tutor can give when we go back this time. I really want to quit." As soon as he said this, the others all nodded their heads in agreement. Obviously, everyone was thinking of the same thing. The leader was silent for a moment before he said, "The Grand Tutor was kind to me back then. I didn't expect that I would implicate all of you for my own selfish reasons. Forget it. If you want to leave, I'll try my best to fight for you so that you won't be alone for the rest of your lives." "Thank you, boss." One of the men sighed and said dejectedly, "Tiantang City is indeed a place of hidden talents. This young brother has suddenly become timid. I'm afraid that I won't forget what happened tonight for the rest of my life. I won't have the courage to wield my sword anymore." The leader chuckled bitterly and said, "Ever since I became the cavalry leader that year, I was knocked off my horse by the enemy on the battlefield and was about to die. It was Lord Supreme Cloud who suddenly appeared and saved my life. Since then, I've been fearful of the battlefield and dared not fight anymore. I retired from the army and went home. Later on, I was recruited by the Grand Tutor and came to Tiantang City. I didn't expect that now, I don't even have the courage to roam the martial world anymore." The other's eyes shone. "Boss has such a past. You actually had the opportunity to meet Lord Supreme Cloud?" "Lord Supreme Cloud was masked at the time. No one knows what he looks like. How can I be an exception? However, my life was indeed saved by Supreme Cloud." The burly leader sighed. "But just now, I suddenly felt very ashamed. You have the strength, but you don't think about protecting your home and country. Instead, you run away from the battlefield in fear of the enemy. It's really shameful. When I'm done fighting for everyone, I'll make another trip to the frontier fortress." The leader sighed. After paying my respects to Lord Supreme Cloud, I'll go look for all of you. We'll go together. Several people said in unison. The 11 of them supported each other and walked forward. In the night, Yun Yang's purple robe fluttered. It was as if a cold and hard mask had suddenly appeared on his face. Fang Mafei and Lao Mei understood at the same time. No wonder the young master, who was full of murderous intent and had the upper hand, suddenly showed mercy and let these people live. It turned out that, the young master had recognized the identity of this burly man the moment he came out. She looked at Yun Yang standing alone in the night breeze. Both Fang Mafei and Lao Mei's eyes were filled with bitterness. This lonely silhouette made both of them feel as if their hearts were clenched in pain. It was an indescribable heartache. Both of them had the urge to go forward and hug Yun Yang in their arms, comforting him. This hero's heart was really, already riddled with holes. However, they could only watch in silence now. Right now, Yun Yang's heart could only be resolved and understood by himself. Yun Yang lifted his feet and continued to walk forward. His expression was cold as if he had not heard anything. The 11 of them walked out of the street and saw Yun Yang's silhouette disappearing around a corner. The purple robe seemed to flash before their eyes. The boss instinctively shuddered, and his already pale face turned even paler. There was an inexplicable feeling in his heart. Why does this silhouette look so familiar? Where have I seen it before? Where could it be? However, the doubt was fleeting, replaced by the joy of surviving a disaster. Let's go. As Yun Yang walked, mystical qi pulsed around him. The stench of blood that had accumulated on him slowly disappeared along with the vibration of the mystical qi. There was not even a trace of it left under his feet. It was only then that Yun Yang finally changed his direction and walked towards the Cirrus house. He had to tell Yun Zuyu about this no matter what. Ju Chen. Yun Zuyu stood up abruptly and looked at Yun Yang. A strong murderous aura exploded from her pretty eyes. It's her. Yun Yang sipped his tea tiredly. She's dead. She's dead. Yun Zuyu gritted her teeth, her eyes rimmed red. It was not because of sadness but anger. I'll go check. Yun Yang said, don't be hasty. May I ask Sister Yu, what is Ju Chen's background? She's also one of the sisters adopted by Madame back then. Yun Zuyu was a little disappointed. Before this, she had never shown any emotion. Why would she suddenly turn against us this time? Is she a companion who came with fifth brother and you? Yun Yang asked. No. Yun Zuyu smiled bitterly. Only 5 of us and your fifth brother came out at that time, then I'm relieved. Yun Yang heaved a sigh of relief and said, Sister-in-law, forgive this young brother for being straightforward. I'm afraid your people need to be sorted out in detail. They're targeting me this time and their perception of me is wrong. There's no danger, but if... He did not finish his words but Yun Zuyu obviously understood what he meant. She nodded slowly and said, I understand. This cannot be neglected. Yun Yang nodded. I won't stay here any longer. I'll take my leave now. Sister-in-law, please take care of yourself and be more cautious. Watching Yun Yang's retreating silhouette, she stepped out of the Cirrus house alone and disappeared into the night. Yun Zuyu could only feel her heart sinking. She could no longer suppress the intense anger of being deceived. The sister whom she had brought up and nurtured with all her heart had betrayed her. Before her betrayal, she had not even sensed anything. This matter was really too strange. Check who Ju Chen has been interacting with during this period of time. I want the report as soon as possible. Yun Zuyu ordered and then sat down on the chair, staring at the chair where Yun Yang had sat, lost in thought. It was fortunate that Yun Yang was capable and nothing had happened to him. Otherwise, how could she face horror again? Horror, Yun Zuyu seemed to have thought of something as her expression changed. She stood up at once and dashed out of the door to chase after Yun Yang. However, just as she was about to reach the door, she stopped abruptly, the expression on her pretty face shifting. Yun Zuyu had suddenly thought of something. Just now, and even a few times before that, when Yun Yang had addressed Supreme Flame, he had called him Fifth Brother. Tonight, the two words Fifth Brother had come out of Yun Yang's mouth once again. And it was not just once. This was obviously not a slip of the tongue. It was the truth, the reality. Yun Zuyu's gaze grew brighter. Those who belonged to the Nine Heavens dictum would only address him as Fifth Sir or Flame Sir. There would never be such a term as Fifth Brother. No one would dare, no one would offend him like this. Only among the Nine Supreme's own ranking brothers would there be such a term as Fifth Brother. Yun Yang had addressed Supreme Flame as Fifth Brother and called her sister-in-law. Did that not mean? Yun Zuyu's eyes glowed. It was no wonder that this young brother could turn the entire capital upside down with a wave of his hand, yet he could still hide behind the scenes and not show himself, as steady as a mountain. It was no wonder that he was so meticulous in his planning. Each step he took could be extraordinarily secretive yet extraordinarily sturdy. It was no wonder that his cultivation base was so high despite his young age. Even when so many people were looking for him, they could not find anything that could be used against him. It was no wonder that Ling Xiaozue, who had always been arrogant, was full of praises for him and said that he owed him a favor. It was no wonder that he was so elegant in front of the four noble young masters, subduing the four young masters without a sound with just a simple wave of his hand. Such a person, such a method, such a scheme, such a strategy. It turned out that young brother Yun was actually one of the Nine Supremes. Yun Zuyu sucked in a deep breath. Then, she called Qing Shanxue in. Shui, help me check out all the sisters' backgrounds, especially those who have been in close contact with the outside world recently, then investigate them in detail. Qing Shanxue answered in a low voice, yes, big sister. Has something happened? Yun Zuyu said, nothing much. I just feel that something is not right. I want to clean up Cirrus House and get rid of all the abnormal ones. It's different now. My big brother Ling Xiaozue has openly declared that Cirrus House is his family. This is a great opportunity but we can't abuse it. Do you understand what I'm saying? Qing Shanxue frowned and said, if that's the case, I'm afraid that more than half of the 12 valued sisters will be purged. Yun Zuyu sighed. This can't be helped. We can only give more silver tails and let the sisters live on their own. Cirrus House can't keep so many people. Alright, big sister. Since she understood Yun Zuyu's reason for doing so, Qing Shanxue agreed without hesitation. Just like what Yun Zuyu had said, Ling Xiaozue's promise of protection was both an opportunity and a restriction. If the people of Cirrus House were to use this opportunity recklessly, they would only be committing suicide. Watching Qing Shanxue leave, Yun Zuyu sighed softly. No matter what the reason was, Cirrus House had to be cleaned up. There were too many people here. If she could not be completely at ease, would it not put Yun Yang in danger of being exposed at any time? This is Flame's brother, he's also my brother. I, Yun Zuyu, will never allow anything to happen to my brother here. What happened to Ju Chen once was already too many times. If it were to happen again. Chapter 176. The 19th day of the 10th lunar month. Yutong's army had begun to move since the evening. They came from all directions and gathered at the south gate of Tiantang City. It was as if many rivers of steel were gathering towards the ocean. Everyone looked solemn, their helmets and armor gleaming. Even the robes of the soldiers were clean. Each of them was uncouth, but they had cleaned themselves up and stood at attention. Most of the soldiers had even shaved their beards. When they approached the wide expanse of land near the south gate, everyone stopped in unison and checked each other carefully once more. Even the dust on the warhorses' hooves had been wiped clean, what more their own clothes and shoes. Only then did they line up neatly and go to the designated campsite. In the west, an army of 100,000 was neatly organized. 10 generals led the troops, forming 10 columns as they slowly advanced. Banners fluttered in the wind. The 10 banners did not have the insignia of the generals, but they were all 4 words. Yutong's Western Troop. Following a roar that sounded like a tiger's roar, a series of horns sounded in unison and did not stop for a long time. The 3 armies stood still at the same time. Boom! 100,000 men lowered the spears in their hands, but there was only one uniform sound. After the sound, there was only silence and solemnity. The 10 generals looked at the generals on the stage and waved their hands to give their orders as if they did not see them. Ours. It was only 3 words. In each of the columns, 5,000 people moved out to move tables, chairs, and the large amounts of wine that had long been placed in the center and piled up like a mountain. The 10 generals' orders seemed to mean, bring our tables, chairs, and wine over. However, all the enemy generals on the high platform understood the meaning behind his words. Ours. This place is ours. Ours. It had only been an hour, and there was no sound at all, but the 100,000 men of the Western Troop were already seated at their respective tables. There were 10 men to a table on average, and they stood in a circle, unmoving like a mountain. Then, another roar resounded in the air. Sit. This sound was like a clap of thunder in the sky. It was the 100,000 soldiers shouting at the same time, sit. Before his voice faded away, the sound of his voice was still ringing in their ears. Every single soldier of the Western Army sat down in unison. Their backs were straight and they sat upright, including the 10 generals who were leading the army. All of them sat in an orderly manner, not a single hair out of place. He sat down and did not move. It was as if hundreds of thousands of statues had stopped at this place. The elite performance displayed by the 100,000 Western troops caused the expressions of the generals from the various countries to change slightly. However, they could not help but feel impressed. A horn sounded from the north, and 100,000 soldiers advanced like a forest. The same 10 columns, 10 generals. The same bright armor, the same spirit. Yutong's Northern Troop. Flags fluttered in the wind, everyone was calm and composed, even the horses were extremely calm. Ours. The Northern Army generals roared in unison. Sit. The same formation, the same posture, the same earth, another 100,000 more statues. On each table, there was only one jar of wine. It was enough. The sound of galloping horses could be heard from the south before it stopped. They were packing up their belongings. Then, the same 100,000 men, 10 generals, 10 columns, and 100,000 statues sat down. The East. Yutong's Eastern Troop was Tai Zheng's own army, and also the main formation of this meeting. As the howling autumn wind became more and more violent, the dust that was stirred up by the movements of the hundreds of thousands of soldiers was all swept up into the sky by the biting cold autumn wind, revealing the 100,000 cavalrymen that were already neatly lined up in the east. Another horn sounded as the 100,000 steel cavalry advanced at the same time. It was the same 10 columns and 10 generals. The clanging sound grew closer. The 100,000 horses that were more than the rest of the troops actually maintained a synchronized pace. There was no noise at all. That kind of heaviness, that kind of awe-inspiring, that kind of aura of facing death with equanimity, was naturally displayed in its entirety. Ours. The 10 great generals shouted at the same time. Their voices were filled with pride and a sense of lofty aspiration and lofty aspiration. Han Sanhe and the rest stood on the stage, watching quietly, the fear in their hearts growing stronger than before. As famous generals in the world, they were acutely aware of the difference between the Eastern troop and the other three troops. When the generals hollered ours, the 100,000 steel cavalry puffed up their chests and lifted their heads in unison. Everyone's eyes glowed with an intimidating glint. At this moment, the eyes of the 100,000 steel cavalry were gleaming like wolves. In fact, even the warhorses they were riding on had become ferocious because of this. Yutong's 4 armies, the Eastern troop is the strongest indeed. Han Sanhe said leisurely. At this moment, the generals of the various countries all had solemn expressions as they focused their attention on the armies around them. All of them were silently comparing the armies they were leading with the armies they were leading. Yutong's 4 armies, a total of 400,000 men, were organized and disciplined. They did not move from dusk until dawn. As time went by, not only did the soldiers not show any signs of fatigue, they grew more and more excited. The generals of the other countries, who were surrounded by Yutong's 400,000 men, looked calm and nonchalant. Their expressions were carefree, displaying the demeanor of a general. It was midnight. Yun Yang was resting in the residence of Yun. Tai Zheng's wedding should be fine. Yun Yang had been extremely busy these few days, it was better for him to rest for a while. After all, he still had to attend the wedding soon. Unexpectedly, he heard a commotion at the door. A voice called out, "Young Master Yun." The call made Yun Yang's head go numb. Was this not Tai Zheng's voice? At this delicate moment, as the groom, what was he doing here instead of rushing to the wedding? Had something happened? Even if something had happened, he should not have come here. This was the residence of Marquis of Heavenly Clouds, there was only Yun Yang, the popinjay, in the residence. There was no one else. In spite of this, Tai Zheng had come personally. No matter what his purpose was, Yun Yang dared not treat him lightly. With a swift movement, he came to the door with a swoosh. Fang Mafei was already standing there a step earlier, ready to open the door. The door opened. Yun Yang looked towards the source of the voice and saw Tai Zheng dressed in red. His tall stature was like an iron tower, standing in front of the residence of Yun with a serious expression. "Why has Marshal Tai come to my humble abode at this time?" Yun Yang asked, "Has something happened?" Tai Zheng was taken aback and knew that Yun Yang had misunderstood immediately. He laughed and said, "Of course I'm here to invite young Master Yun to attend my wedding. To drink a cup of wedding wine together." Yun Yang was taken aback as well, pointing at his own nose foolishly and wondering, "Why would you think of inviting me?" Thinking about it, it seemed that with his current status, he should not be receiving such treatment no matter what. Tai Zheng, Marshal Tai, was the third most important person in Yutong's military, second only to Qiu Jianhan and Leng Daoyin. He was the bridegroom of today's wedding, coming personally to invite a famous popinjay to the wedding banquet. Tai Zheng took a step forward, his face full of gratitude as he said in a low voice, "How can 30 million taels not be worth a cup of wedding wine?" The corners of Yun Yang's lips twitched as he chuckled humorlessly, "I knew it, that fellow's big mouth can't keep a secret." This was reasonable. How could a fellow like young Master Ma withstand Tai Zheng's questioning? Of course, he had sold himself. Yun Yang smiled humorlessly, feeling rather comforted in his heart. This was his sincerity. Tai Zheng laughed and extended his hand. "Young Master Yun, please." At this moment, earth-shattering cheers erupted from the top of Tiantang City's city wall. 2 squads of cavalry rode out at the same time from the left and right, the red carpet rolling forward like waves. It was 100 feet wide, spreading all the way to the stage. Then, Tai Zheng galloped out on his steed. Beside him was another steed with a slender woman riding nervously on its back. Her small hands gripped the reins tightly, she was dressed in a bright red dress, her head covered with a bright red headscarf. There was another lady beside the bride, it was Shangguan Lingxiu. She was dressed in a pink dress, looking graceful amidst her valiant aura. The man accompanying Tai Zheng was Yun Yang. Young Master Yun was still dressed in his almost iconic purple robe. Riding on the back of the horse, he looked rather hot-blooded as well. The groom, bride, groomsmen, and bridesmaids appeared at the same time. Naturally, there was a deafening cheer. A young and handsome assistant general beside him was looking at Yun Yang with eyes filled with jealousy. Speaking of which, there was a reason behind this scene. Tai Zheng had gone to the residence of Shangguan to beg the old mistress a few times to make Shangguan Lingxiu her bridesmaid. In between, Qiu Jianhan and Ling Daoyin had spoken up for her as well, only then did it happen. Making Yun Yang the groomsman, on the other hand, was truly an impromptu idea. Tai Zheng was truly grateful for great young Master Yun's generous gift of gold, but he did not know how to repay it. It was only when a flash of inspiration struck him that great young Master Yun's most popular trait was that he was a popinjay. All popinjays loved to be in the limelight, and the only one who was in the limelight after him, the bridegroom, would be none other than being his groomsman. Therefore, he had replaced the assistant general who had long been scheduled to be his groomsman. The adjutant general was a promising youth, a rising star in the military who had been courting Shangguan Lingxiu for a few years. Now that he had the chance to walk on the stage with his goddess, he could not help but feel inexplicably excited despite the fact that he had borrowed the glory of Tai Zheng's wedding. No matter whose wedding it was, they had appeared at the wedding side by side after all, had they not? Even if they could not pursue her in the future, this memory was still beautiful enough. Who would have thought that Tai Zheng would inform him to replace the groomsman just as the ceremony was about to be held? His great opportunity had been snatched away by Yun Yang, who had appeared out of nowhere. How could the assistant general not be filled with resentment? He really wanted to cry but had no tears. Chapter 177. Tai Zheng's wedding had mostly given up on the empire of Yutang's traditional wedding customs for the sake of this grand event. He had brought the bride out with a veil, revealing her face in front of the public. If it had been according to the empire of Yutang's old customs, the wedding of a general of Tai Zheng's status would have been extremely troublesome. However, before Tai Zheng's promise, two old marshals had gone to Tai Zheng's father-in-law's home, the minister of the Board of Appointments, to persuade him with kind words. No matter how reluctant the old man was, he could only accept it. Among them, old Marshal Qiu had said something that moved the minister the most. "There won't be another woman in the entire continent who can be as glorious as your daughter's marriage. This is unprecedented, why are you still being so pretentious?" The old minister was enlightened when he heard it, beaming with joy and no longer had any objections. Under the watchful eyes of the public, the 400,000 troops that had gathered here cheered at the same time when they saw Tai Zheng and the bride walking side by side. The howls of wolves rose and fell in an instant. For a moment it was as if a pack of wolves was howling at the moon outside the south gate. This group of men in the army finally had the chance to vent. All of them were straightforward men, and they were so excited that their faces and necks were red. Tai Zheng was not offended at all as he guffawed and said loudly, "Silence. Silence. F***ck. You bastards, your father has already entertained the wedding today, why are you still making a fuss? Don't you know the rules?" In front of the 100,000 steel cavalry of the Eastern Troop, 10 generals stood up abruptly and howled, "We want to see the bride. This is the rule, do you understand?" The 100,000 troops roared excitedly, "We want to see the bride. This is the rule." Then, it was the Northern Troop. "We want to see the bride. This is the rule." The Southern Troop, the Western Troop, one after another, from all directions, all of them wanted to see the bride's number, and all of them claimed to follow the rules. Tai Zheng did not know whether to laugh or to cry. He hollered, "Your father hasn't even seen it myself, what the f***ck are you looking at?" What f*ck are you looking at? The 400,000 people roared at the same time, their words becoming more and more casual as they went straight for the color of the bride. Ha ha ha! Immediately, the crowd laughed until they staggered from side to side. On the stage, Han Sanha and the other enemy generals exchanged glances and stood up at the same time, shouting in unison, "We want to see the bride too. We will abide by the rules too." Howl! The entire area outside the south gate was in an uproar. Howls of wolves could be heard everywhere, be it friend or foe. There were even tens of thousands of fellows who were eager to see the world in chaos. They stuck their fingers into their mouths and whistled sharply. Imagine, what would happen if tens of thousands of people whistled at the same time? For a moment, roars of laughter, wolf howls, and whistles filled the air. Taizheng guffawed and led the bride, groomsmen, and bridesmaids to the stage. Behind the procession of the newcomers was the royal edict of congratulation. This was also His Majesty's order: no matter what, they must not steal Taizheng's limelight today. Up on the stage, the eunuch who delivered the decree read it to Taizheng in a low-key manner before leaving quietly, almost as if he did not exist. What followed was a sudden silence at the city gate. A troop of men and horses exited the city slowly. They were clad in black armor and rode at an extremely slow pace. The person leading the group was an old lady with a walking stick in her hand. She was strolling over while beside her was the Emperor of Yutong, who was dressed in bright yellow but was dressed casually. His Majesty supported old Mistress Shangguan as he walked over slowly. Behind both of them was a huge plaque. There were 4 words painted in gold on it. It was His Majesty's handwriting. The Shangguan family of generals. What was more eye-catching than the plaque were the people who were carrying it. It was 6 children who were carrying the plaque forward with all their might. Behind them were 3,000 royal guards dressed in black. The Shangguan family of generals had to be there for a militant event. There was also the Emperor of Yutong, His Majesty, Yupeza. He had come personally, dressed in casual clothes, showing that he was attending this event in his private capacity. On the stage, Qiu Jianhan and Leng Daoyin stood shoulder to shoulder at the front of the stage while Taizheng stood beside them. The 3 of them stood there for a moment, pausing. In the empire of Dongxuan's camp, Han Sanha stood up solemnly and walked forward slowly, standing shoulder to shoulder with Qiu Jianhan and Leng Daoyin. Then, an old general with white hair and beard from each of the other 3 empires stepped forward at the same time. 7 of the old generals stood in a row. Standing solemnly, the old generals did not distinguish between friend and foe. Each of them stood straight, their gazes solemn as they watched the huge plaque approach slowly. At this moment, a pin drop could be heard outside the southern gate of Tiantang City that was filled with close to 500,000 people. Finally, the plaque stopped 1,000 feet away from the stage. There was another stage that had been built there. His Majesty and old Mistress Shangguan ascended the stairs. The plaque of the Shangguan family of generals was hung high on the stage. On both sides of the stage, there were 8 flags that were raised at the same time, twice the height of all the other banners. There were 4 big words on each flag. Shangguan family of generals. Old Mistress Shangguan sat in the middle while her 6 grandchildren stood in a row behind her. His Majesty stood up and walked to the front of the stage. He turned to face old Mistress Shangguan. Silence reigned. Qiu Jianhan and the other 7 famous generals spoke at the top of their lungs. The night is filled with stars, the Big Dipper. The 400,000 troops chanted at the same time. Warriors of the world honor Shangguan. A grand event of militants, one family for all eternity, worshipping from all directions, heroes on all sides, no militant in the world doesn't revere, a family of martyrs, Shangguan family of generals. Qiu Jianhan said loudly, a grand event of militants, worshipping the family of generals first. all militants, salute the family of generals. The 7 old marshals straightened their bodies at the same time and bowed deeply. 400,000 warriors saluted at the same time. On the stage, His Majesty bowed deeply as well. Old Mistress Shengwan sat upright, unmoving like a mountain as she accepted the salute. The 6 children behind her knelt down to return the salute. Being worshipped by the world's warriors was the honor that the Shengwan family of generals deserved, it was also the willingness of the militants. The Shengwan family of generals had always been the highest spiritual belief of the militants in this half of the continent. A belief, a label. The struggle for hegemony between nations had been going on for years and generations. It had been like this for thousands and tens of thousands of years. However, to be able to achieve such great feats like the Shengwan family of generals and to be so tragic, their beliefs remained unwavering and unwavering even in death. They were a family of generals who had always protected their home and country loyally. There was only one family, there was no other. Old Mistress Shengwan's eyes flashed, as if she was looking at the memorial tablets in her ancestral hall. This supreme honor of facing the worship of the soldiers of the world was exchanged for the densely packed memorial tablets. Do any of you know what is happening right now? Can you guys feel it? Turning to look at her 6 great-grandchildren, she felt a wave of exasperation in her heart. The faces of the 6 little fellows were glowing, and their faces were filled with glory. All of their little bodies were perfectly straight. Their gazes were resolute, proud and excited as if they were about to spew fire. This is my home. This is the Shengwan family of generals. When I've grown up, I'll guard the Shengwan family of generals' honor as well. This was the common thought in the hearts of the 6 children. However, the old mistress could see through the children's thoughts and could only sigh inwardly. Guard the family of generals' honor, it's easy to say, but do you know what you need to pay? It's something that you dare not even think about. If one of these 6 children could have a good end in the future, I believe that the ancestors of the Shengwan family of generals would be smiling in the afterlife. However, the Shengwan family of generals had gone through 4 generations and more than 150 years, but none of the men had been able to escape the fate of dying in battle. Could anyone among these 6 children really break this? The ceremony of the world's famed generals paying homage to the family of generals announced the official start of today's military wedding. Old Mistress Shengwan stood up and invited His Majesty to take a seat. Today, everyone, including His Majesty, was actually just a spectator. The main character today was Tai Zheng and all the soldiers present. Xiao Jianhan and Leng Daoyin went over to sit, their seats right next to Han Sanhe. Han Sanhe nodded with a smile. Xiao Jianhan snorted and turned his head away while Leng Daoyin rolled his eyes, ignoring him as well. He had suffered at the hands of this bastard on the battlefield for decades, how could he still be nice to him? Moreover, there might be a series of battles after today and it would all be started by this person. Han Sanhe smiled. The saber and sword duo are still as straightforward as ever. Xiao Jianhan and Leng Daoyin could clearly tell that the saber and sword duo Han Sanhe was referring to was definitely not a hero but a bear. Exasperated, they turned around and said, Han Sanhe, your father will make you drunk today. Han Sanhe shrugged, smoothing his hair as he smiled faintly, this old man is so scared. Leng Daoyin was so angry that his stomach hurt as he panted heavily. This old man is the master of ceremonies today and bears great responsibility. I won't hold a grudge against an old thing like you. Xiao Jianhan's expression was dark. A few old generals from the 3 empires looked over in a gloating manner. It's really been a long time since I've seen the saber and sword duo, you bears. You're even more glorious than before, even more deserving of your name. If the first half of the sentence was not taken into account, it would be a compliment, but the first half of the sentence was even more heart-wrenching. Xiao Jianhan stood up abruptly, his aura exploding like never before, scaring the 3 old men into taking a step back. Chapter 178. The three old generals felt humiliated, taking a step forward, ready to start a fight. Xiao Jianhan, on the other hand, strode out and called out in a low voice, "Brothers!" The 400,000 troops responded in unison. Roar! Han Sanha rolled his eyes. "Brothers? You sound like bandits shouting slogans." The few old men looked mischievous. Xiao Jianhan no longer bothered with his nemesis and declared loudly, "Today is a big day." He rambled on and on, presiding over the newlyweds, bowing to heaven and earth, to their parents, to the emperor, to the family of generals, to each other as husband and wife. As far as the eye could see, there was nothing to be said about the bride's side of the couple. The bride was tall and slender, with a lithe figure that stood out. Her bridesmaid, Shangguan Lingxiu, was even taller, exuding a heroic aura. However, compared to the bride's side, the groom's side was slightly more of an eyesore. The groomsman's image was not bad, he was a full 185 meters tall, and his looks were heaven-defying. He was handsome and dashing, he would be a godlike figure in almost any occasion. Under normal circumstances, it would require considerable courage to ask Yun Yang to be the groomsman. After all, this groomsman was too eye-catching. Today, however, Yun Yang did not look so outstanding. There was only one reason: Tai Zheng's physique. The groom was too tall. Tai Zheng was 2.5 meters tall, his shoulders broad and his waist strong. He was like an iron tower when he stood there. As a man, Yun Yang's only flaw was that he was slightly skinny, which was why he looked skinny when he wore clothes. However, standing next to Tai Zheng now, he was like a bean sprout standing under a big tree when he was being compared. Not only was it awkward for others, even Yun Yang himself felt uneasy. This Tai Zheng actually harbors ill intentions in asking me to be the groomsman today. Is he using me to contrast you? Yun Yang tried his best to straighten his back, but he was still shorter than Tai Zheng by a sword's height. He turned to look at this fellow's tower-like body in annoyance, but he could only see his chest. He could not help the resentment in his heart. This fellow, he's so tall and strong while the bride looks so petite. Will this bastard crush her to death on his wedding night? Old Marshal Xiao Jianhan stood far away. When he saw the combination of Tai Zheng and Yun Yang, he burst out into laughter, almost choking on his laughter. Finally, the ceremony was completed. Yun Yang felt like he had been pardoned as he ran off the stage in a flustered manner. He felt that he had never been so humiliated in his entire life. So what if you're tall? Could he look down on others just because he was strong? Shangguan Lingxiu came to his side and could not help chuckling when she saw his exasperated expression. What? Do you think you're too short? Yun Yang lowered his head and looked down at Shangguan Lingxiu, smiling without saying a word. Why hadn't he felt it before? The feeling of looking down from above was really good. Looking at his expression, Shangguan Lingxiu bit her lip and kicked his buttocks. Humph. This bastard was too despicable. He was actually trying to get a sense of superiority from a woman's height. Could you be any more shameless? Why don't you go to heaven? Still, Sister Lingxiu is really pretty today. Yun Yang, who had just been kicked in the buttocks, looked at Shangguan Lingxiu from head to toe, his eyes filled with admiration. Shangguan Lingxiu blushed and asked in a low voice, "Really?" "Yes, really. Of course it's true." Yun Yang nodded solemnly. "I've only realized today that Sister Lingxiu is really beautiful when you dress up like this. You really do look like a woman now." Bang. Shangguan Lingxiu kicked Yun Yang's buttocks fiercely again and turned to leave with a cold expression. The veins on her forehead were almost popping out. This bastard. What do you mean I look like a woman? I'm a woman, all right? Yun Yang chuckled and hopped, hugging his leg as he pretended to grimace from the kick. His body tilted and fell right into a chair. He even called out, "Sister Lingxiu, come and sit here. Girls must be dignified. Do you know that? Do you understand? Sit, my foot. Dignified, my foot. Shangguan Lingxiu snorted and glared dagger-like at Yun Yang. She found a chair far away from Yun Yang and sat down. Her meaning was obvious: I don't care to sit with you. After sitting down, she actually turned her face to the other side. Shangguan Lingxiu held herself back from looking at that hateful face. Shangguan Lingxiu was afraid that she would not be able to stop herself from charging over and chopping someone with her saber if she were to see him again. On the side, Han Sanhe looked at Tai Zheng for a moment before his gaze shifted to Yun Yang, seemingly unintentionally. This person was the legendary son of Marquis of Heavenly Clouds? This was all the information Han Sanhe knew about Yun Yang. However, after seeing Yun Yang now, he could acutely feel that this child was not ordinary. Under such a grand occasion, even Qiu Jianhan and Ling Daoyin, the two old troublemakers, were slightly unnatural. However, this young master of Marquis of Heavenly Clouds did not change his expression at all. He was laughing and talking casually, looking calm and confident. Even when Tai Zheng was a little embarrassed due to his much taller than an average person on the stage, he was still at ease. His expression and movement had turned all the awkwardness into nothingness. This young fellow was not simple at all. In other words, his usual image and the information in the intelligence reports were all fake. If it was a person, then the rumors and performances were all fake. In that case, how terrifying was this person? What was his true self? Han Sanhe calculated in his heart, his gaze growing deeper. The groomsman is Marquis Yun's son? Han Sanhe turned to ask as Qiu Jianhan sat down beside him. Qiu Jianhan rolled his eyes and said, "This old man doesn't know him." Han Sanhe huffed, "You old ****starred. Qiu Jianhan rolled his eyes. "What else do you want to know?" "This old man doesn't know anything, I don't know anything." "What can you do? Bite me?" Han Sanhe glared at him. Facing Qiu Jianhan's thick skin that was thicker than the city wall, even someone as experienced as Han Sanhe could only sigh helplessly. However, when Han Sanhe turned his head back, he was deep in thought. Although this old ****starred Qiu Jianhan had not given him face just now, he had said, "What other information do you want to know?" Information? Why was it information? Could the identity of this young master of Marquis of Heavenly Clouds be information? If so, what kind of information could it be? Behind Han Sanhe, a scrawny man dressed in black, his face hidden in the collar of his shirt, was also deep in thought. Then, he leaned in and whispered something into Han Sanhe's ear. Han Sanhe nodded slightly. It was at this moment that the commotion around them suddenly stopped. On the stage, Tai Zheng's tower-like body stood tall and straight. He was dressed in a red battle robe. Beside him was his lovely bride, Qianer. Her veil had been taken off and she wore a bright red dress. Her figure was slender and her face was dignified, her eyes were clear like water, she was a stunning beauty. "Brothers!" Tai Zheng's strong voice rang out, "Today, I, Tai Zheng, am married. Today is my big day. Look, is your sister-in-law beautiful?" "Beautiful." The 400,000-strong army cheered in unison, their voices shaking the world. "Is she beautiful?" Tai Zheng roared. "She's beautiful." Another chorus of cheers reverberated in the air. "Ha ha ha." Tai Zheng guffawed, tears welling up in his eyes. All right. I, Tai Zheng, am married, I have a wife. This is a joyous occasion. However, Tai Zheng hollered, "Half a year ago, many of the brothers who went to war with me will never return. They won't have the chance to witness this scene today." The atmosphere in the entire area instantly became heavy because of these words. 8 months ago, Qianer and I had confirmed our marriage and our wedding date. However, there was a change at the border and the steel cavalry was deployed. On the day I, Tai Zheng, set out, I had told my brothers, when I return in triumph, I will invite my brothers to my wedding wine. My brothers were elated then, all of them telling me that they were willing to congratulate the marshal with their unparalleled military merits in exchange for a goblet of wedding wine. Tai Zheng's voice was gradually turning hoarse, his sobbing tone faintly discernible. The 400,000 to 500,000 people present held their breaths, their eyes widened as they focused their gazes on Tai Zheng who was speaking. I, Tai Zheng, had said, as long as we can return in victory this time, everyone will have a goblet of wedding wine. Tai Zheng's Adam's apple bobbed up and down, the sound of phlegm thick in his throat, he could barely control his emotions. In this battle, more than 100,000 of my comrades and brothers have perished. Tai Zheng said hoarsely, I can remember every single word they said to me, they echo in my ears every single day, but they have never returned. The wind howled, the sky moaned, more than 400,000 warriors were silent. Many of my brothers who said that they would exchange their unparalleled military merits for a goblet of wedding wine, are lying on the battlefield now. Tai Zheng's tall and straight body could no longer control his trembling, his tears finally falling to the ground. Everyone's fists were clenched tightly, their gazes focused on Tai Zheng, as if their gazes had solidified into something solid. Xian shuffled a few steps on the stage and stretched her hand over shyly, holding Tai Zheng's hand hesitantly and bashfully. Then, she gripped it tightly. She did not know why she had done so, but she had done so naturally. At this moment, she could clearly feel that the man beside her needed her support. His body that was as strong as an iron tower was still as imposing as a mountain, but at this moment, he really needed her support, needed a hand to support him. That kind of weakness, he could clearly feel. Therefore, she did it without any hesitation. She did it naturally. The gazes of the hundreds of thousands of soldiers around them brightened abruptly, especially Tai Zheng's eastern troop. It was especially so for Tai Zheng's eastern troop, everyone's breathing was hurried, their gazes unprecedentedly intense. This small action caused all the soldiers present to fall in love with this sweet-tempered woman in an instant. They acknowledged this sweet-tempered woman. Chapter 179. Tai Zheng's trembling body slowly calmed down, regaining his majestic aura. Feeling the soft and delicate hand in his large hand, he suddenly laughed and said loudly, "Brothers who have fallen in battle, do you see this from the heavens? This is your sister-in-law." It was on that day that I, Tai Zheng, swore that all my brothers, be it dead or alive, as long as I, Tai Zheng, am still alive, this wedding will continue. Then, my wedding wine, be it in heaven or on earth, will everyone have a goblet. This goblet of wine belongs to Yutong's militants. Tai Zheng's voice was like thunder, like a thunderclap in the clear sky, deafening to the ears. This goblet of wine belongs to Yutong's militants. However, this goblet of wine also belongs to all the militants in this world. Beside him, the 4 old marshals of the 4 empires stood up simultaneously and echoed loudly. The joy of life, the brothers on the battlefield, be it dead or alive, will all have a goblet of wine. This is Yutong's military event. We old men have discussed and turned this grand occasion into a grand occasion for the entire continent's militants. We want to drink such a goblet of wine too. Our brothers who have fallen in battle want to drink as well. They should have a share in this goblet of wine. Yutong's militants who have fallen in battle have died in our hands, our brothers who have been slumbering in the underworld have died in the hands of Yutong's militants as well. Enemies of life and death, different paths. While you all are drinking, we want our brothers to have a goblet of militaristic wine as well. Han Sanha's gaze was like 2 bolts of lightning that shot across the sky. As militants, we've drunk the goblet of war countless times, we've drunk the goblet of victory countless times. However, we've never drunk such a goblet of wine that only belongs to militants. Because the wine of militants belongs to brothers who have lived and died, regardless of friend or foe, Han Sanha said, there has never been such a goblet of wine before, and there probably won't be again in the future. Today, General Tai's wedding has provided us with a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The old marshals puffed out their chests at the same time. On the battlefield, we shall be enemies. However, no matter how we fight to the death, militants will always be each other's confidants. Thank you, General Tai. Thank you, Yutong's military brothers, for promoting this grand event of the world's militants. The four old marshals with fluttering white beards raised their hands in salute at the same time. Tai Zheng guffawed. Brothers, do you see this? Everyone standing on this stage today is our greatest enemy. They are also our greatest enemies. They are expressing their heartfelt gratitude to us. We will accept this gratitude without any psychological burden. Remember to remember the faces of these people clearly. After we finish drinking today, you can casually cut off the head of any one of them. That will be a great merit, enough for you to be conferred the title of Marquis or General. This sentence sounded like a joke, but everyone knew that it was absolutely not a joke. Everyone understood the meaning of this sentence. Below the stage, the 400,000 soldiers were all in high spirits. Their eyes shone brightly as they looked at the famous generals of the various countries on the stage, desperately trying to memorize them. Those who stood further away could not see clearly, so they begged desperately, "Brother, big brother, please let me stand in front of you, let me see, big brother in front, please draw it. Your father didn't see it clearly. What if I have the chance to behead them but fail due to uncertainty? How much regret would I have in the future? These are the most valuable heads. I beg big brother in front to draw their portraits, naked bodies leaping 30 feet into the air in a world of ice and snow, kneeling on a mountain of sabers to draw their portraits. I'm not asking for too many of these heads. I'll be rich if I really chop off 17 or 18 of them, 17 or 18. If your father can chop off one in this lifetime, our entire family won't have to worry for generations to come. So King valuable. Are these still heads? This is practically a golden path, King hell. The more I look at them, the more I feel that these heads are really handsome. For your father's future as a marquis and nobility, all of you will be sacrificed. What kind of feeling was it to have 400,000 soldiers staring at one's head and knowing very clearly that these 400,000 soldiers wanted to chop off one's head? Han Sanha and the others were not afraid, but they could not help but be caught between laughter and tears. Serve the wine. Tai Zheng howled. Countless soldiers began to bustle about, moving pot after pot of wine onto the stage. This wine was no longer a secret to many of Yutong's soldiers. However, to the famous generals of various countries, their eyes lit up. When they saw the name on the pot of wine, their breathing grew heavier. Blood of the hero. Was this the name of the wine? When they looked at the line of words that followed, it made everyone's blood burn like a flame. Loyal heart and blood to defend the country, loyal soul of steel to build the fortress. These two sentences were applicable to Yutong's soldiers, but they were also applicable to all the soldiers in the world. Loyal soul and blood were not limited to Yutong. For so many years, the blood that had been spilled all over Tianxian continent, covering every inch of land, regardless of friend or foe, was it not the blood of the hero? They were all defending the country, they were all building the fortress. Suddenly, their blood was boiling. Bang, 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 the moment the mud seal was opened, the aroma of wine permeated the air. The dark red wine poured into the bowl. It was truly the color of fresh blood. The first goblet. Tai Zheng said, to Yutong, to His Majesty. On the stage far away, His Majesty did not expect to be involved. He stood up and said with a smile, today is a grand event for the militants. I am only here to observe the ceremony. There is no need for a toast. Tai Zheng said, Your Majesty has been kind to this humble official and the soldiers of my generation. How can I not offer this goblet? This official shall drink first as a sign of respect. Behind him, the 6 old marshals of the 5 empires and hundreds of generals raised their goblets at the same time, toasting His Majesty from afar. They raised their goblets and downed the contents. Words could not be spoken, but they were all in the wine. His Majesty's heroic spirit rose, and he shouted, Good! He then picked up the goblet and downed it in one gulp. He knew why the soldiers were toasting him with the first goblet. It was because he had done something that no other emperor could or dared to do when he was still on the throne. He had gathered all the generals of the enemy forces in the nation's capital to sit together and drink to their heart's content. Such magnanimity surpassed his predecessors, and it was hard to find a successor. This goblet of wine was toasted by all the generals of the continent. Although the gist of it was not stated, the meaning was clear. Based on this alone, His Majesty was worthy of the title of the greatest emperor throughout the ages. It was because he understood this that His Majesty drank this goblet of wine delightfully. It was glorious. There was even a feeling in his heart that with this goblet of wine today, he could face the past emperors with his head held high even in death. He could face them with pride. The second goblet. Tai Zheng was still facing them. To the family of generals. All the generals raised their goblets in unison. To the family of generals. Old Mistress Shangguan stood up shakily. Without a word, she picked up the goblet and downed it in one gulp. Behind her, the 6 children were flushed and trembling. They did not drink, but they looked like they were drunk. The third goblet. Tai Zheng hollered, to all the brothers of Yutong's military who are still alive. With a long howl, the 3 armies stood up at the same time and raised their goblets in salute. There was a loud bang in the sky, and a communication rocket rose into the sky, crackling. Along with the sharp sound of breaking through the air, there seemed to be an explosion in the distance at the same time, spreading in all directions. One after another, the communication rockets got further and further away, but they were closely connected. In the blink of an eye, they were already thousands of miles away. A quarter of an hour later, Tai Zheng raised his goblet. Brothers! Cheers to this goblet! 400,000 warriors raised their goblets at the same time and gulped down the wine. Yutong's soldiers stood up at the same time, raising their goblets and downing the contents in one gulp. There were tears in their eyes, but the blood in their chests was burning fiercely. After a long time, the sound of rockets exploded in the camps of Yutong's borders. All the warriors stood up and raised their goblets. Marshal's wedding, let us brothers drink. The warriors from all sides drank their goblets in one gulp. The fourth goblet. Tai Zheng's voice was intense as he hollered into the sky, to Yutong's brothers who have fallen in battle. Tai Zheng, a toast to all of you. May your souls not be far away, do not forget Yutong in the afterlife. If there's a next life, let us fight together again. Amidst Tai Zheng's loud cry, all Yutong's soldiers stood up to salute once more, their faces solemn. The fragrance of wine permeated the air, shooting straight into the sky. In front of all the military graves, the soldiers who had been waiting solemnly poured the wine in their hands onto the ground. Brothers, drink. This is our marshal's wedding wine, it's also our marshal's promise that day. This is also the wine that all of you should drink. A bowl of crimson heroes' blood was placed in the homes of the families of the fallen warriors. It was like the blood of the heroes, still flowing intensely. Each family received a bowl of wine and a tael of silver. It was not a lot of money, but it was Tai Zheng's best effort. This was a return gift to his brothers. At the border, there was also the blood of the heroes that was slowly sprinkled onto the graves. Brothers, the wine is here. The crimson wine that resembled blood slowly seeped into the ground while the tears of the soldiers who stood solemnly dripped onto the soil. This is Marshall's wedding wine, the wine that we've promised to drink to our heart's content on Marshall's wedding. The afterlife is not far away, the souls of the heroes are still here. Brothers, let us drink together. Heaven and earth, the world of mortals and the netherworld, our hearts are together, our blood flows together. Brothers, cheers! A gust of autumn wind whistled past. The grass on the graves of the fallen warriors danced in the wind, covering the mountains and plains. The trees bowed neatly, the grass that was 1,000 miles of grassland bowed at the same time. The emerald waves were like waves. Yet, they were so neat. It was like the tens of millions of souls who had died were still lined up neatly. After drinking this goblet of wine, they were about to mount their horses and wield their sabers, waiting for the command to charge forward bravely. Chapter 180. The Fifth Goblet of Wine. Tai Zheng's gaze swept across the crowd. To all of Yutong's wounded brothers on the battlefield. Our bodies may be crippled, but our will is not. If there's a war, we can still put on our armor. These brothers, each and every one of them is great, each and every one of them is a hero. Brothers, I, Tai Zheng, toast you. Cheers. Marshall. In each disabled soldier's family, each disabled soldier's eyes were brimming with tears. No matter what kind of disability they had, whether they could drink or not, whether they should or should not, they held a bowl of hero's blood in their hands and downed it with tears streaming down their cheeks. For a moment, their hearts were filled with emotion. The Sixth Goblet of Wine. Tai Zheng hollered, to the 9 Supreme's lords. Tai Zheng drained his goblet. All the soldiers saluted at the same time. At this moment, the famed generals from various countries were shaken. Yun Yang, who was behind the stage, was shaken as well. The Seventh Goblet of Wine. Tai Zheng said loudly, to the world's heroes. To all the enemies. To all the militants who are still fighting in this world. Han Sanhe and the rest stepped forward at the same time. All the famed generals from the continent stood side by side, their faces solemn as they accepted the goblet of wine. Drink this goblet of wine. There's no regret in dying in battle, there's glory in victory. Brothers, as militants, you are the backbone of steel. Lying drunk on the battlefield with a smile, what's the harm in dying in battle? Today, we raise our goblets and drink, tomorrow, we shall face swords and sabers, the fate of the world's militants, you and I shall shoulder it together. Han Sanhe's voice was filled with emotion, the cadence of his voice traveling thousands of miles. The northern wind carried the banners and whistled in the sky. The crowd was solemn and silent for a long time. The famed generals and warriors of various countries raised their goblets at the same time. As they emptied their goblets, countless people were shimmering with tears. It was unknown when it started, but someone began to recite in a low voice. The number of people who recited along increased until there were more than 400,000 people reciting at the same time. Everyone's eyes shone brightly, and their expressions were solemn. There's no regret in dying in battle, there's glory in victory. Brothers, as militants, you are the backbone of steel. Lying drunk on the battlefield with a smile, what's the harm in dying in battle? Today, we raise our goblets and drink, tomorrow, we shall face swords and sabers, the fate of the world's militants, you and I shall shoulder it together. Their voices were like rolling thunder, rumbling on the ground and in the air. The Eighth Cup. Tai Zheng hollered, a salute to all the military brothers who have perished on the battlefield. This cup of wine was a shared glory, this cup of wine was a forgotten grudge. This cup of wine, let us meet again in the next life as brothers. With this cup of wine, let's fight again in our next lives and be enemies again. Boom! The entire place was burning with excitement. Countless people shouted at the top of their lungs, "We'll be brothers again in our next life. Let's fight again in our next life and be enemies again." All of them were shouting themselves hoarse, and their eyes were bloodshot. Han Sanhe and the other generals' eyes were red as well, tipping their heads back to finish the wine in their goblets. Feeling the scorching alcohol coursing through their veins, Han Sanhe and the rest felt their blood boil. This was a soldier's wine. This was the wine of a soldier. In this half of his life, he had already lost count of the amount of wine he had drunk, but this was the first time he felt that the wine had touched his heart. It didn't matter if they were alive or dead, injured or disabled. As long as they were in the army, as long as they were on the battlefield, it didn't matter if they were now or not, all the brothers in the army had a share. The blood of the hero. Han Sanhe took a pot of wine and stared at it for a long time before sighing, "Good wine." Pouring a bowl, he closed his eyes, 2 drops of tears trickling down the corners of his eyes as he downed it. "It's really good wine. From now on, the blood of the hero will be exclusively provided by Dongxuan's army." Han Sanhe was determined. "No matter what those bastards come up with, I'll only drink the blood of the hero when I'm in the army from now on. Because this is the wine that all the soldiers in the world should drink. Life and death, victory and defeat, all the soldiers shall drink this bowl of wine together. Sharing the blood of the hero flows, drinking the blood of the hero together, this is the blood of the hero." The other old generals were left to savor the aftertaste as well. Which one of these people was not a person of high status and authority? The amount of wine they had drunk in their lifetime was uncountable. Although the hero's blood wine wasn't ordinary, it wasn't at the level of being too high class. However, everyone was full of praises for the wine, the aftertaste lingering in their minds. Those who had tasted the wine could not help but feel that if they did not drink the blood of the hero when they drank with their brothers in the army in the future, what was the point? The 9th goblet of wine. Tai Zheng closed his eyes. To the wives of the soldiers in the world, to the mothers of the soldiers in the world. At the same time, to my wife as well. I wish to be with my wife forever. I wish to grow old together as husband and wife, to watch our children and grandchildren fill the house. I wish for the world to be at peace, for everyone to be healthy, for every family to be happy. The soldiers suddenly fell silent. But I might not be able to do it. I'm a soldier of Yutong. The country is in a precarious situation, I don't know when I'll suddenly go to the battlefield, I don't know when I'll fall on the battlefield forever. Tai Zheng raised his head. But I have no regrets. This goblet of wine is to my new wife, to all the families of the soldiers in the world. All of you have worked hard. When we're alive, all of you live in fear, yearning anxiously. When we're dead, all of you suffer and support your families. Whether we live or die, all of you are the most tired. Not only are you physically tired, you're also mentally tired. To all of you. Tai Zheng raised his head and emptied the goblet. This time, he did not issue a command nor did he rehearse beforehand. However, all the generals, old marshals, and soldiers on the stage stood up in unison, saluting, raising their goblets and emptying the goblets. To all the families of the soldiers in the world. The autumn wind whistled in the sky. Other than the howling of the wind, there was only silence. Old Mistress Shangguan heaved a long sigh. She looked at the bride, Qian, who was dressed in a bright red dress, leaning against Tai Zheng shyly on the stage. Her face was filled with happiness and satisfaction. She could not help but close her eyes softly. Silly girl, you might have been touched by these words, thinking that you found a good husband who's responsible and considerate to you. However, you didn't realize that Tai Zheng's words were all true. More than that, you felt guilt. The wedding ceremony had finally come to an end. His Majesty, old Mistress Shangguan, and the rest had left first. The troops from all 4 sides had left as well. The bridegroom, Marshal Taizheng, held a thick stack of banknotes in his hand, feeling like he had suddenly become a millionaire. The generals who had come to congratulate him had come for a drink. They knew how difficult it was for Taizheng to hold this grand event of the military. How could they come empty-handed? Even if they were enemies, this congratulatory gift was something that no one would be willing to give, and it would not be any less. Even the empire of Dongxian, who had given the least, had given a total of 2 million silver taels for the wine. This is all pooled by our comrades in the military. It has nothing to do with our country's standpoint. It's just that the men in the military have spontaneously pooled their money to celebrate Marshal Tai's wedding. No rejection is allowed. It's our fortune to be able to drink this goblet of wine today, but it's also a disturbance. Since we've benefited from it, we should return the favor. If Marshal Tai insists on not accepting it, it means that he's purposely making things difficult for us. Could it be that he wants us to owe him a favor so that we can take advantage of it on the battlefield in the future? Taizheng was left with no other choice but to use both the carrot and the stick. Taizheng pondered for a moment before he finally accepted the gift and said, "Let's drink together today. Our friendship ends today. When we meet on the battlefield in the future, it'll still be a matter of life and death. There's no room for negotiation. This is the true nature of a soldier." Finally, Taizheng received more than 20 million silver taels as a gift. After a discussion between Marshal Qiu and Marshal Leng, they ordered Taizheng to keep 2 million silver taels for himself. Half of the remaining 90% of the gift would go to the national treasury while the other 40% would be distributed to the disabled and the families of the martyrs. "Why are you still giving it to me? What do I need so much money for? Wouldn't it save more casualties if it's all given away?" Taizheng was obviously dissatisfied with the outcome as he grumbled loudly. Xiao Jianhan looked at the rash young man with pity and sighed. On the other side, Taizheng's father-in-law, the president of the board of official appointments, was glaring at a certain someone with an eerie gaze. Even his newly wedded bride was looking at Taizheng anxiously. He had forked out the wine money and purchased all the necessities for the wedding, as well as many items for the boarder. Taizheng's current net worth, to put it nicely, was to say that he was struggling to make ends meet. To put it bluntly, he was penniless, a pauper. This description was not fake at all. If Taizheng's method of distributing the monetary gift was followed, this fellow would have to go to the generals' houses to ask for money for his dinner when he returned, or else he would have to rely on his wife's dowry to fill his stomach. It was a shame that this fellow was still shouting, "What do I need so much money for? Just take it when I ask you to. What the F***ck are you talking about?" Xiao Jianhan glared. Taizheng's face twitched as he accepted the banknotes. Feeling the heat in his hand, he shoved it to the bride quickly. "My wife, you'll be in charge of the money at home from now on." Xian blushed to her ears as she thought to herself, "What a bastard, giving away the family's power in front of so many people, but why am I so happy about it?" Xian held the banknotes in her tender hands as she lowered her head with a flushed face. "Ha ha ha." Regardless of friend or foe, the generals from the other countries guffawed when they saw the scene. Handing over the financial power on the first day of marriage. There's another unparalleled marshal in the Henpeck team from now on. It's worth celebrating. The old fellows were grinning from ear to ear as they took out their own money and gave gifts to the newlyweds in their own names. Everyone's blessings were sincere, their emotions genuine. Xian and Taizheng thanked them politely and accepted all of them. Everyone was beaming with joy. However, no matter who it was, they knew very well that no matter how harmonious the atmosphere was now, none of them would show mercy when they faced each other again on the battlefield once they turned around. This is all I've written for the entire night. Read on, don't forget to give me a few monthly recommendation votes. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.